Everybody, it is March 2nd. This is a City of Minnetonka City Council study session. I'll call this meeting to order and we will do introductions. We'll start with Miranda Dahman.
Miranda Dahman, Assistant City Manager.
Eric Nilsson, City Attorney.
Mike Funk, City Manager.
Patsy Foster Bolton, Ward 1.
Kimberly Wilburn, at large.
Amanda Maxwell, Ward 2.
Rebecca Shack, Mayor.
Paula
You want some
Manley,
help
Ward
there?
3.
Kizzy Copley, Ward 4. Deb Calvert, at large, C-Day.
Susan Thomas, City Planner.
Julie Wishnak, Community Development Director.
Scott Borman, Police Chief.
You have to identify yourself for the record.
Michael Cavis, resident.
Okay.
Jason Meckel, resident.
Frank Sterpka, resident.
Thank you.
Great. Welcome, everybody. We'll get started right away with our business items. The first one is substance regulations. Mike?
Thank you, Mayor Shack and Council. Good evening. Tonight we'll have presentations from probably more to the staff to your right. So I think, is it Chief Boardman, are you going to kick things off?
Yep.
So Chief Boardman's going to kick things off, talk about Kratom. That became surfaced through our development of the 2026 annual study session work plan. So we'll talk about Kratom. So Chief Boardman will do that, and then followed by other staff. I believe Julie will talk about cannabis. So this is a little bit about all substance abuse, so Kratom, and then we'll have a cannabis overview. As you know, Council, you adopted a ordinance last year regulating cannabis in Minnetonka, and Ms. Wishnak will have an update just with some of the activity and inquiry that's happened regarding stores, retail stores that perhaps could be coming to Minnetonka. And then also we'll talk about enforcement of tobacco. And so as that Chief Boardroom, I believe, will also touch on the tobacco enforcement, because that came up a couple times in the council meetings the last fall, where we had some residents and young adults addressing the council regarding concerns over flavored tobacco in Minnetonka, and staff has an update for you on what that looks like and kind of the status of where you're at today. So with that, if it's okay, just turn it over to Chief Boardman to get us going.
Excellent.
Thanks,
Scott?
Mike. Good evening. Yeah, as Mike has mentioned, this topic came up in a meeting several months ago, and I think specifically the Kratom was brought to our attention. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't know what that was, and so I've done my research. Reminded me of my e-bike presentation, but I will do my best to explain what it is. But I'm also going to touch on. I'm going to do Kratom first. Walk you through what we know about Kratom and what we know about it in our city. And then I'll touch on, I'll do a review of our tobacco compliance checks, kind of what we do annually and some of the results. And then I'll kick it over to Julie for a discussion on cannabis. And so, I can assume Kratom, that came up because, we have, since I've asked some people, not so much my peers about Kratom, but just out in the street or amongst some of the officers, and they're aware of the term Kratom. And I think how I best describe it is it's considered dangerous, really, for a couple reasons. Is because its dependence carries an overdose risk. It lacks regulatory oversight, which I'll kind of cover a little bit tonight, and it has documented adverse health effects. And one of the things as I created this, it was really to provide you with some, as other cities in the country or other states tackle this issue, they look at a couple of different concerns from a policy decision, as a decision maker. One is around consumer safety, youth access, product contamination, and co-use with other substances. So what is it? Well, it is, what is kratom? It is a native plant originating in Southeast Asia, and it contains some natural compounds that are highlighted here, because what happens is, like with many other synthetic drugs, what you find is you'll take, like in this case, a leaf, and you'll extract different compounds from that, and you mix it, and you make it into something other than what it maybe initially was. And that's important because as you look at regulating anything, in this case kratom, it may not be illegal today, but if the federal government or the state were to make kratom illegal, sometimes what happens is then they remix the formula and something new comes out, and now it's not illegal. And so just keep that in mind. I think one of the issues with trying to regulate something like kratom is that with synthetic drugs, you switch up the ingredients, and now it's not so much illegal. And so that's always going to be a struggle. In low doses, it is a stimulant effect with increased energy and alertness. It works in minutes, lasts for hours. It does react like an opioid, providing some pain relief and relaxation. And on the street, it's referred to as the gas station heroin. And that's because it's readily available, and it can provide in high dosages a similar effect to opioid-like drugs that are regulated more strictly by the government. And so you can kind of see some of the side effects of kratom. I gave just a quick, about what it is. And so it is sold as a herbal extract or a dietary supplement to boost energy, mood, and relieve pain. It is sold in a variety of places, including some of our tobacco stores, and I'll kind of cover that here in a second. You can buy it online pretty easily. In fact, you go to Amazon right now if you would like, and you could buy some. So it's ingested orally in the form of a capsule, an extract, or a tablet. It can also be chewed, dried, crushed, or be consumed or put it in your tea if you'd like. And then there's some compounds within kratom that are even more dangerous, and it gets into these 7-OH. You may hear that. It's often sold in pills, gummies, or in a shot. You also see it in seltzer. So. Who uses kratom? I did do some research on your typical demographics. You can take a look at that. Nothing, that jumps out at you, but I just wanted to kind of let you just take a look at that for a second. It does, like I said, in low dosages, it does increase energy, and I think that's one of the attraction to the drug. High doses have the adverse effect, and I think that's what's most difficult is when you try to regulate something, it's usually because high dosages may have a different response. Also, you're not sure what's being put in the drug as these things are made up in a lab or in a kitchen or wherever they're making the stuff. Talk about is kratom addictive? It is from what the research states. It's a little too early to tell. However, they find that it has very similar effects to use of opioids over a long period of time. So your withdrawal is more difficult. The longer you use it, it is more difficult to stop using it. And with children, it does, for those that are pregnant, it can create some problems for the baby. And really the reason for it is like anything else. You build up a tolerance, and you have a physical dependence to the drug, and then you have withdrawal symptoms. So that's really why it is addictive. talk a little bit about federal regulations, and I'm gonna show you actually a nice little map or a sheet that shows where it's being regulated. But currently, it's not being regulated by the FDA. It is not approved for medical use or as a dietary supplement. In fact, the DEA has labeled kratom as a drug or chemical of concern. And then within kratom, I had mentioned there's different compounds which are extracted from the plant and can create a whole different issue of drug use. And so there is some attention to some of the compounds within kratom, but as of today, there's been no action on that. And then, due to the lack of regulation, there is no consistent standard for selling kratom, and that's why some states have adopted some procedures where there is more of a regulation. It's sold in stores, however, it's being regulated on the compounds and stuff like that, and I'll kind of cover that in a minute here. And then kratom products have been found to contain heavy metals such as lead and harmful germs such as salmonella. And the FDA has linked 35 deaths to salmonella-tainted kratom. Kind of narrowing it down to Minnesota specifically, in 2018, the state did change it to you can't sell to anybody under the age of 18. When we went to some of our local tobacco-only stores, we did discover that it was 21 in stores in Minnetonka, so that's encouraging. I don't know if they're associating the sale of kratom with tobacco, but we did check, and under the age of 21, you cannot purchase it. I can't tell you if everyone, but the ones we did check, there was a couple we did check, and it was 21 was the age. And then in 2023, this Kratom Consumer Protection Act was introduced, and it did not pass. And so as of right now, the only regulation in Minnesota, anywhere in Minnesota, is that you cannot purchase it under the age of 18. That's state law. No other city in Minnesota, county, nobody has adopted any additional regulations on the use of kratom. This Kratom Consumer Protection Act was actually, folks that support kratom wanted to bring support of this regulation regarding the sale of it, and it really focused on a couple areas: age restrictions, product standards, labeling and testing requirements, the compound limits. So the limits I had mentioned, some of the ingredients that are in there are very dangerous unless it's controlled on how much they use. And so this Consumer Protection Act, it wasn't just Minnesota, it was a national effort to get states to adopt it. So instead of having an all-out prohibition on kratom sales, I think what I read is that this Kratom Consumer Protection Act was a way of not allowing any sale. It was more, how can we best regulate it? And unfortunately, it would have been nice if this would have occurred in 2023, because I think we wouldn't be talking about this today. And so that just kind of talks a little bit about what Minnesota did. And then here I did a quick snapshot of what you're seeing in other parts of the country. Again, the only city to full ban is in the city of Bloomington, Illinois. Nothing here in Minnesota. You can see some statewide legislation that prohibit it, and then you see some other local control in California, partial ban. But I think most of the cities, it's in the staff report, really took a look at how can they look at this Consumer Protection Act, and it really focuses around making sure you have the right age, under 21, prohibited, the right marketing, the right labeling. So when I actually have a photo. If you go into one of our tobacco shops, pretty much the entire wall is kratom. And if you look at the packaging or the way it's advertised, one could say it's to attract. They're good at marketing, and so I think when this Consumer Protection Act, it was really a way to help control that, making sure there's advisories so people know exactly what they're purchasing. And again, it's really unfortunate that it did not pass in Minnesota. And then as I look through all the different states and kind of what led them to really focus on their approach, and this is something that I would bring forward to you as you consider this. And from my position, this was more about education and really to kind of understand what it is. And then if there was a desire to somewhat to regulate this, this is what I saw in other jurisdictions is one, they maintained current approach, or they really adopted a regulated market model, testing, labeling, you know, what the potency is of it, strengthen the age and retail controls, and then target high potency or synthetic derivatives. And what that means, and this is what's a little, well, it's concerning, but it's the reality of it. If you were today to create an ordinance prohibiting the sale, possession of kratom, tomorrow there might be a new drug on the shelf. And so what some jurisdictions are doing are really focusing in on the compounds. Like, isn't so much kratom, what within kratom is dangerous and what potency. And so that's what I saw was the challenge, is that these things are changing daily. And if you're going to rely on the federal government to do, you know, FDA or to get it scheduled like a controlled substance, I think one of the issues that they run into is that because they change it so frequently, it's hard to stay on top of what's the latest and greatest drug. And so that's just kind of where cities have landed. And that's why I keep bringing up this Consumer Protection Act. I personally believe the best course is for the state and I actually brought this up to somebody in Congress, and kratom wasn't even on the radar. And so I think it's more just education. And then for the state of Minnesota to maybe step into this arena and take a look at where can they as a state control this. And this is where I see areas is, you know, around the age, marketing, you know, how it's being sold in stores, some sort of regulation, like what is in that you know, in it as ingredients, because right now it's pretty much a free-for-all. And so that's about all I had on kratom, was just a real quick overview of what it is and kind of some of the challenges. But these are some areas that I saw other councils or those that are doing public policy, they focused on these areas right here. And so I'll kind of stop here and kind of turn it back over to you, Mayor, for any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Council Deb, questions?
Yeah, I have, I have two questions that are interrelated. So in kratom products that are on shelves right now, is it kratom or is it kratom synthetic derivatives or both? Because my second question would be, at what point is something considered a synthetic derivative? Because if you could just define it, you could ban it.
Yeah, so your question, what we saw on the shelf is you may see kratom in there somewhere, but oftentimes look at the ingredients, it's going to pull out like some of the ones you saw on the first slide. I'm sorry, right there, the second bullet. Mm-hmm. You may see ingredients such as that, but it's more of the compounds that are pulled out. Now, it was in a seltzer. I think it depends on how it's done. Like if it's a leaf that's crushed up, it may just be its whole form as kratom. But if they put it into like a seltzer or some other, they may have to take ingredients out of that leaf. So I think it's a variety of ways it's marketed. It's not, you don't just see kratom. Like the one that I think the seltzer in the cooler is called Mitrol, M-I-T-R-O-L. So I think they're using portions of the compounds. I think it's all over the place. And I think that's where the regulation is helpful, is when you say you have to identify what's in there and know exactly what you're getting. And that right now doesn't happen. Was there a second question?
Well, then, you know, the whole thing is, there were places that were selling kratom tea, I think, in Hopkins just a few years ago. And, you know, that if you're just steeping leaves, that's one thing. If it's a synthetic derivative, I feel like if you can define what synthetic is, define what synthetic is, you can ban it.
Is that a question?
I mean, is
I
that
think you're
true?
right.
I mean, that is a question.
We did talk about it. To me, if you could call, I don't know if you can just generically say any synthetic. If you call it the drug of 7-hydrol, which is an ingredient within the leaf, you'd be catching up with what's the next thing. I think you're to a point there. It would take some more working with what that looks like, but that is the challenge.
I mean, that's the same with almost any
Correct.
drug, is that they keep changing it, even pharmaceutical companies do it to keep that thing.
Especially opioids, fentanyl. I mean, carfentanil, and there's probably a new one out there. All they do is change the makeup of that drug, and where this becomes dangerous is when when it's mixed with other drugs, and there's no control. You would like fentanyl. You don't know what you're getting for dosages, and I think that's where this is very dangerous. And this has been out for a long time. In fact, we went to some of our convenience stores, gas stations, and there is one that we know of that sells it, seltzer. We know one that pulled it from their shelf like a year ago, and that must have been a decision by the corporate level. And so there are folks paying attention to it, but
Interesting.
yeah, it's
Council, other questions? Anybody? So, I mean, I think the question then for us is my perspective is maybe this is a first step in like information. Like now we know. I don't know that it seems out of our depth as far as what we could do with this information. I mean, is that fair, Scott?
Yeah, and so we've talked about that. So a couple options. One is I think it is exactly that. I think it's more of education and what's actually happening in Minnetonka. So it is encouraging that where we think it's being sold, they're requiring you to be 21. I think that's good. They did that on ON. I think it's also and then for us to monitor. I mean, you don't always have to jump on a bandwagon because other cities do, but I think it is interesting that not one city in the state of Minnesota has addressed this. So I think it's watching what others do, and then putting pressure on the state. If there's any chance to say, hey, especially if this was actually brought forward in 23, because I think if that's where it should land is at the state. And if they jumped on with the Consumer Protection Act that's occurring in many other states in the country, that would provide the protection that we're talking about right now. I think that would be my suggestion is to try to put pressure on the state. I asked somebody, and they didn't know, so I don't know if it's even on their radar, but it's maybe something we just encourage them to go back and revisit this. I'm not sure why it didn't pass in 23. Maybe, I don't know, Eric, do you remember?
Didn't even have a hearing.
It was just introduced and didn't even get a hearing.
Okay.
So maybe this is something we can put on our 2027 legislative awareness topics, or
And I can bring it to my committee at the league, because we talk about stuff like this all the time. We had
That's a good
huge
place.
presentation on label, the cannabis product labeling and sort of the whole marketing and all of the other things so this seems very much in that.
so if everybody's kind of comfortable with moving deliberately but not significantly on this for right now and see, and if Scott, you can kind of keep us aware if you're noticing people,
Having challenges.
Yeah.
calls or whatever, you're hearing amongst the chiefs that this is a problem, then maybe we can raise it up to a higher level.
Can
I
I
think that-
ask one, that just
Yep, go
reminded
ahead.
me of another question. So, it's like cannabis, that there's probably not a field sobriety, there's not, how do you find out if someone's under the influence of kratom? And so that's a whole other.
Yeah. So it would have to be through a drug test. I mean, a drug test would do like a blood.
test.
Yeah, and really an impairment, and so it's really considered it's a psychoactive drug, and so if you think about that, cannabis, alcohol, tobacco, caffeine are all in that category, but they're legal, right? And kratom falls into that area. But then in the same category, you got heroin, cocaine, LSD, and ecstasy that are illegal, and so within the same realm that you're hallucinating, maybe you're depending on the quantity. But I actually checked with our drug task force officer, and maybe it's because it's not a controlled substance. He went back and said, "Do we have anything with kratom?" And they've had zero interaction with Kratom. You remember, I think it was a long time ago, there was some, what was it called, cat? There was some other, I can't remember, leaf that was.
Yeah, it's from East Africa.
Yes, and so when you talk about other substances, there's a variety of like leaf-like substances that can create like an opioid-like feeling. They all have a different name and are made up differently. So I think if there is a discussion with the league, it's to maybe look at not so much identifying the name of the plant, it's like the cause and effect. So that's with controlled substance. I think if it has some sort of a certain level of if you're addictive, certain sort of then it's not so much the name, it's more about what it does. I think that would be a better approach. Then you're not trying to, okay, what's the next term we're dealing with?
All the different
Correct.
things, yeah.
So I think that's a good, to your point, Mayor, I think that's exactly what I would recommend. Unless there's a desire to explore something differently, that's, I'd be looking for feedback on that, but that's kind of where we landed, is just keep an eye on it and see how it continues to come out.
Excellent. All right, well, thank you for all that research. You could write a paper on it now. Don't start going to school like Julie.
Yeah.
At my age, it comes in and it goes out. So by next week,
Okay.
I'll
All
remind
right,
him.
tobacco, right? That's
yeah,
you're
so
gonna talk about.
for tobacco, I just wanted to maybe talk about how we do compliance checks. So, I don't have a slide presentation. I'm just going to verbally talk about this. So, annually, roughly after school gets out, our school resource officers will go out and do alcohol and tobacco compliance checks. We do it every year, about the same time each year. So I know operation, but it's not like we're trying to catch you in the act of something. We do it annually each year, and so I know last year with flavored tobacco, it came up, and when we've done tobacco compliance checks, we send in somebody under the age of 21 to attempt to buy tobacco. What we haven't put as much of a focus on is the flavored tobacco. And this year last year we had complaints, and we identified the folks that were non-compliant. We worked with them, and they, as far as I know, are compliant. And I think our approach has always been, when it comes to compliance on just regulatory, whether it's alcohol, tobacco. I mean, we have a lot of ordinances just a variety of ordinances. We are more reactive. We like to work with, the folks, the businesses, and we like to have a good relationship. So we are not as aggressive as some residents would like, but I do believe we have a nice balance and approach. And at the end of the day, it was we were successful in removing all the flavored tobacco, because it was a learning curve for us too. Because again, like anything else, these things change in the way they market the stuff. You don't know, when you walk in, you don't know what you're looking at. And so I would say going forward, I know we had a few that were non-compliant that I think we're working through the non-compliance issues. But I would suspect going forward, you're going to see as direct enforcement on the under 21 as well as the flavored tobacco.
I think the only issue I would add is, remember that it takes a long time to get through a criminal prosecution. So if someone sold to an underage person, this could be for tobacco or for liquor, it takes sometimes up to a year to process that person. So if the city council doesn't see you'll see an order of stipulation, which is their punishment basically for doing the civil side of that. But you won't see that. It lags way behind. So sometimes you'll scratch your head and you'll say, well, that was done a long time ago. Why didn't I see this for a while? But it's because we have to wait until the criminal prosecution is done. If they're found guilty, then we file the civil order for stipulation, which is there's a pre-described penalty in the city code for tobacco. So that's how the criminal side and the civil side interact. And then at any time, if you feel like it's egregious enough, you can pull somebody's tobacco license when they have violations like that. But usually you'd have to get to a pretty extreme level. We got to that recently, actually, with a tobacco licensee, and we did remove their license for lack of compliance. So that happened, and they no longer can sell tobacco, and unfortunately can't be in business. But they wouldn't comply, so we did that.
Yeah, and beyond the annual compliance checks, we, on occasion, will have complaints against a specific retailer, and we will go in at that time. We don't wait until the next year to do the compliance checks. And so I guess that's what I wanted, just to provide a quick, just a recap of how we do it, and if there's any specific questions you had regarding the tobacco or compliance checks or anything around that, I would certainly.
Council questions?
I do have.
So
Patsy, go ahead.
So all of the people that came to the council meeting and you know, voiced their concerns about, were those all followed up on?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
So that's all? Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
And I think part of it too, if I may, Patsy, there's not, a lot of times the police don't say tactically what they're doing with a
Sure.
particular enforcement case. So they have to kind of go through all of the violations that we've heard. And you had a plan. There's education first, right? Then educate again. I think you had to do this a couple times with a couple of people. And then get to the point at which you're, writing a violation. So I think that takes time, and you have to allow time for everyone to adjust. So I know it wasn't as fast as some people wanted, but I think there's a methodical approach on at least the police's side as well as the community development.
Yeah, and I mean, that's our approach for years, is a balance. We can come in pretty hard and aggressive from day one. We've always been very accommodating. Hey, what can we do? How do we make this work? Education, it's kind of like e-bikes. Yeah, at some point we have to take it to the next level. If we don't have compliance, we may have to step it up. But I mean, our first few attempts will be more. Could you please help us out? Do the right thing, right? And then if we need
And
to
comply.
and comply. And some cities may have a different approach, but regardless of the complaint, I think that has been our approach to a variety of, beyond just alcohol, tobacco, and whatever. It's you name it when it comes to ordinance violations and
The
things
goal
like
is
that.
compliance.
The goal is compliance.
Mhm.
And I think we're there. And if we don't get there and we get a complaint, we will follow up and address it. I think you had a question too, Paul.
Yeah, I just did have a quick question. You just kind of alluded to it. How do other cities in terms of fines? Like, because I was told by a resident, well, other cities will just impose a fine right away, and why don't we do that? And I don't know. It's just that's what I understood, that we file a criminal complaint first and then have to wait up to a year for the civil. And then it's like, well, other cities don't do that. So do we know? I mean, what options are? Is there an option to impose a civil penalty first, or do we have to wait?
No, that's a good question. I
until
don't
the
know
criminal?
the way that works, but.
I mean, we have fines. For
Are you asking, can we go to a civil penalty versus a criminal part?
Yeah, or first,
Or-
and okay, it's like first strike. It's not education and a
Yeah.
little slap on the wrist, and then it goes up. I don't know. I don't
So-
understand how we work compared to other
Maybe I can,
cities.
so at
Yeah.
the time of the violation, we'll issue, the criminal part is addressed then. Immediately, but then it's followed up with the civil portion. So there is some that happens first. I don't know if you can reverse the order. Is that what you're asking?
Well, yeah, because if the criminal portion takes up to a year, and
'Cause-
Well, I think
Go to court.
the idea, and Eric helped me out with this, but the theory is if a court does not find them criminally liable, then what stance does the city
Yeah.
have on the civil side of it? I mean, that's the theory. Am I even close to being right?
Sure, yep, I think that's right, and it's based on the different, standard of proof for a criminal prosecution, which is beyond a reasonable doubt, versus a civil enforcement mechanism, which is preponderance of the evidence, so a lesser standard than a criminal case.
so the civil action would be a lesser.
Correct, yep.
So it wouldn't have to depend on the outcome of the criminal.
That's potentially true. We'd want to look at our ordinance provisions that bear on enforcement, but we'll just note that in general, enforcement is highly discretionary on the part of staff charged with doing it. And so it's typically can be a combination, either in isolation or in order, or a combination of criminal and civil actions, or adverse business license action if it's against a business as well. So there are a number of tools typically that cities will have.
So it wouldn't have
so-
to be wait a year. It could be something quicker than that if we so choose, or am I misunderstanding?
I'm gonna maybe provide a scenario.
Mhm.
This isn't regarding, I think it's along the same lines, is if you get pulled over for a DWI,
Mhm.
and your car can be seized based on a civil forfeiture, because if a certain amount of DWIs, you can lose your car, there's a civil process. I think in theory, you could seize that and take the car, but if all of a sudden there's a criminal case and the person gets maybe found not guilty, first, there could be a hiccup, right? There could be something, and now we kind of got ourselves ahead of where technically, even though the car may have been seized and could lawfully be taken, since we lost the criminal portion, it seems a little punitive that we're going to take. So it's almost the reason for it, I think, too, is also creates more of a level of like, okay, you were found guilty in the court of law for criminally violating selling tobacco. Now we're going to impose civil sanctions. I think it just makes you feel like you're on firm ground. Even though I don't think it's necessary, I just think for like due process, people appreciate that, hey, I had my day in court, I was found, you're guilty, so now we move forward, or not guilty, hey, I don't know if we would move forward with a civil sanction, would you?
No, we wouldn't. No, we wouldn't.
So I think that's
If they
part-
weren't found criminally responsible, there would be no standing for the civil penalties. So it might sound easy to do, but if you're the business owner and we penalize the business, yet the criminal prosecution of whatever happened hasn't been completed, doesn't feel like due process. And I think that's probably why the city has followed this procedure, well, as long as I've been here. But also, I think Eric's right. It's a matter of circumstance and what's happened and how the enforcement agency wants to handle it at that moment. But I would say there's a pretty long history, especially with liquor, tobacco. Help me out. What other? Liquor and tobacco for sure are handled this way. I'm just trying to think of another example. DUI is obviously when you're forfeiting a vehicle. Nothing else rises to my head right now, but that's the point. So I think if you wanted to change how that process works, you're gonna have to change the code to be more emphatic about what procedural steps you wanted.
So are we going to do the same with cannabis then?
Cannabis, whole nother subject matter. So I'll get to that next, but that we do not have that much control in the cannabis arena. So do you want to skip to that, or were there more questions?
Let's try to stick to what
I
we're
would-
talking about. Anything else? Go
I just had a
ahead.
quick follow. I would, even though we have a lot of discretion when it comes to alcohol, tobacco, our folks zero. It's enforcement, and so if we have a violation, we know it's there. They don't say I'm going to give you a break today. We enforce it regardless of the circumstance, only because we're there for a reason. We're doing compliance checks, and so we recognize the focus on flavored tobacco and the under 21, and so next year we'll make sure that we are very specific on what we're doing.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, anything else on the tobacco? Otherwise, let's keep on moving. All right, we're moving on to cannabis.
Cannabis, right. So totally different animal. Remember, the city does not hold the licensing agency for this. So we do not license cannabis. We are a retail registration. And so that's way different in terms of what happens in enforcement. But I'm not even that far, Paula. I'm still on the getting them registered process. So we have 3 out of 5 location requests, and I'm calling them. I have really specific language in the staff report that we prepared because it's important that you understand. First, they have to find the location, right? And then they have to go to the state and say, hey, I found a location that's zoning compliant in the city. Then when it's zoning compliant in the city, now I can go tell the state of Minnesota I have a location. Then they come back to the city, and then they get their permits, and they get their building permits to do whatever changes. And you think, well, how many changes could a cannabis store make, right? But there are different things that they're doing. I don't want to talk necessarily about all of those, but think security measures, right? And then once they have the construction completed, and they have a certification that the construction's completed, they have their final inspection, then they go back to the state, and now the license can be issued. And that's after, I'm pointing to Susan, because Susan's the processor of if they have their compliance. So there's all kinds of different papers and forms that we have to fill out for the state. So just to tell you where these places are, so Ember Roots at 12949 Ridgedale Drive has signed a lease and will begin construction soon. I just looked today, they did actually pull their permits, so they have their permits in hand. Then Sig Dispensary at 14645 in Glen Lake, Excelsior Boulevard. That location has applied for construction permits, and they will, once they're complete, they'll move on to the state. And then the third location is 12970 Wayzata Boulevard. If you can't remember where that is, it's by Wendy's on the frontage road up there. There's a location that they have applied for city registration, but they haven't actually done their permitting at this point. So I say 2 really out of 5, but 3 is on the edge. And it's important to make that point because we take first come, first serve. So basically whoever's pulling those permits is considered a location that is spoken for. What else was I going to tell you? Oh, I know. Just so you know, we field questions about this every day. There's a log kept in the planning division that has who they spoke to, what location they spoke to, what the answer was. Because we're dealing with, we're dealing with lots of different people that may or may not have understanding of the whole process. So we want to make sure first that we knew who we told that information to and what we said. But secondly, so that if they're owners of a business or they want to understand more about why or why not their location was compliant, that we have the answer for them. We did have a little bit of a problem where somebody thought they were compliant and they were not because we're too close to park property, which the city council said you have to be more than 500 feet from a youth-oriented facility. And so they were kind of misunderstanding that, and we kind of didn't help the matter. And so we cleared that up with them. But so I can think of one that we haven't been able to accommodate because we're too close to a park property. So that happened. I don't know, Susan, anything else that you can think of on the cannabis side that we've dealt with?
No, other than just to reiterate what you said, Julie, that the planners take at minimum 2 phone calls or emails a day with people looking for locations, and thus far only 3 have
actually
met the
gone
criteria
through
that we've set out. So
right. So again, 2 more location probably will be in the future. So I'll leave it at that.
On this. I have a question. This is a huge investment before you even know you have a license.
Correct.
Is that right?
That is true.
I broke my own rule. So, and people are really
Yes.
eager to do it.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And we don't know how.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I mean,
Susan wants to
Yeah, go
respond.
ahead, Susan.
Minnetonka is doing things slightly different than some other cities in terms of that building permit requirement. And I think an example is a business owner who's looking for a site in Minnetonka that actually thought they had secured a site in the city of Hopkins. But some folks secured the site previous to them. They have no intention of opening that site in the near future, but Hopkins allows someone to kind of hold a permit or a site. And so
For a period of time.
For a period of time. And we had decided early on that we only wanted to issue registrations to people who were actually constructing
Serious.
something, quite frankly, from my perspective, so that we know we're done when we get to 5, that we know that we're done, that we're not continuing.
And it's not misleading to whoever's looking at more spaces. You know, if there's a building permit in, that registration's gone. So it gives a little bit more predictability to the property owner and the person doing the business. The other way is you're kind of like hoping that you make it to the finish line before the other person, but there's no guarantee. And that, to me, is a little hard. If I were in their shoes, I'd be a little apprehensive. That's actually worse, I think, in terms of exposure.
Okay. So last question, we can move on. Does the state have it together? Are they granting the license? On this issue, specifically? Is it possible to get a license if you get through all of this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I think they definitely have improve the communication about the process. I think the materials they've given us as a local government they're light years ahead of where it was. They are very good about their database information. We notice this with THC providers too, that they're providing all that information pretty much just in time as they approve things. So there's not like a big lag or anything in terms of finding out whether or not somebody has approval. So so far so good. I don't notice anything outstanding as far as the state's concerned, but we haven't gotten to the end point with any of these people. So we'll come back to that.
Okay. Deb?
When you mentioned that you get phone calls for people that are looking for locations, and so 2 questions. One is, what are they asking, and what kind of information are you giving? So are they literally saying, hey, do you know exactly
This address, usually. Yeah.
if that's available?
They're
Okay.
giving us an address. Most callers understand that in the city of Minnetonka, we're going to allow only 5 registrations. And they also understand the zoning districts.
Okay.
They're looking at a specific tenant space and asking us whether or not that tenant space meets our buffer requirements.
For
And
the
so we're
park or-
doing a lot of mapping each day to see whether or not those tenant spaces. If someone calls and just says, what does the city allow for cannabis retail? We send them a link to our ordinance and tell them to call back once they've reviewed that
And have a site.
and have a site in mind.
Yeah.
You know, I don't
Patsy,
know.
go ahead.
I'm hesitant to, because
Yes.
to talk about that specific place. Because
In Glen Lake, she's talking
the
about.
Glen
Yep.
Lake place, and it was 500 feet from a
Right.
park. And this park has never been used, or it's not being used as a park, but there was, right, it's like a fountain that.
I actually disagreed with that assessment.
Okay.
But yeah. It's a splash pad and it's
The
a
splash
water
pad.
active.
Right,
Yeah. Mhm.
and the splash pad, I mean, my question is there any way, because it does, I mean, based on that, I mean, I know that you disagree, but
Mm-hmm.
it isn't in working order, the splash pad, right?
Well, there are some troubles with the splash pad. Yes, I would
But
agree with that.
So, I mean, that's the piece where, what could we do?
Well, I think what you could do as a council is see how many times is this issue cropping up? Like, is
Okay.
it just unbearable that you cannot handle this 500-foot setback, right? So what happened in Glen Lake, it didn't like disqualify every strip mall or any space, I guess I would say, in Glen Lake. It just was the space they were looking at. So it didn't qualify them on that particular site. There are other spaces in Glen Lake that would qualify with adequate buffer, so with the
Yeah.
500 feet. So if you're finding that this is kind of continuing to happen, or you hear about it, or you think you want to get rid of it, you'd have to do a new ordinance amendment to take away that restriction you put on originally. So I think that's just one case. I don't know that I would make some kind of recommendation to remove it at this point, because there might be other areas where you might want that protection. So this
Yeah.
case might not be exactly what you were thinking about in your head, but there would be other examples maybe that you'd want that protection. I don't know. You'd have to
Yeah.
think about.
I mean, I know I remember at that meeting,
Yeah.
I thought the same thing,
Yeah.
but just as we're talking about it, and how hard it is to get this, I just thought.
Yeah, yeah, it is. Yeah.
Okay, well, I think this is another one of those things, a good thing that you have the log, because that may, if we're seeing the same issue crop up with multiple locations, or they're getting, my concern, of course, was that they would all be concentrated at Ridgedale, which was something, if we're finding that there are really only 1 or 2 spots for it, maybe as a council, we reevaluate, but anything else on this? Otherwise, let's keep moving. We'll move on to zoning update.
Bye.
You want to go right to Julie on that?
Now,
Yeah,
we're
yeah,
going to
back
go
on
right to
council, yes.
Susan.
No, turn over to Julie. She'll provide a zoning update. And then, of course, Councilmember Wilburn is on that committee and certainly could add to the conversation, and so is now Mayor Shack. And former mayor, Brad Wursten, is still on the committee. And you've had some activity lately, and tonight it's just more informational with the council. We had prescribed this to come to you a few times throughout the year, and so Julie's here to give an update.
And
Right,
that's Susan.
Yeah, it is, Susan. The only thing I would say, based on what Mike was saying, the committee makeup, if you remember, has changed a little bit, but you guys approved that, and so we have some of the same members continuing on, which is great. Rebecca joined us last meeting, so that was in January. I think we hopped online for a little while to kind of give an update. So I'll turn it over to you, Susan.
And I will apologize to Council Member Wilburn and Maxwell, because you've seen this presentation already at the, or we gave it at the January meeting, and then I also gave the Planning Commission a little
Right.
bit of an update.
Right.
So just going to recap where we've been, what we have done since last February, which is when we kicked this off, and then a schedule for what is yet to be done. Make sure that's on. So in last February 2025, we did kick off the zoning update work. We had meetings with both the staff work group, which is our 20-plus person development review team, as well as with the community work group. And at that meeting, ZoneCo, our consultant, they brought everyone up to speed on the diagnostic report that you had seen back in 2024. And then they also did some preference surveys, visual preference surveys, with folks on both of the work groups. Then in September is when we had a really in-depth working format for these work groups. We met a second time. We reviewed, discussed, and I'll say sometimes debated potential zoning districts, the land uses that should be allowed within those zoning districts, and some specific lot standards within those districts.
Oh,
There's
hi.
Joy.
Hi.
I think both of the work groups seem to have it was, I think, a good time. I think zoning is always a good time, but the work groups were a good time. Since September then, ZoneCo has been compiling and considering all of the feedback that they got out of those work group sessions. They've been drafting a new zoning map. They've been drafting language in 3 modules, and this is how the new zoning or the proposed draft will lay out. So there's this module 1, introductions of just what the zoning ordinance is and how it's going to work, the various districts, and then the uses that would be allowed in those districts. Module 2 is the development standards. So this is where we get into setbacks, heights, trees, landscaping, sustainability features, all of those things. That's in Module 2. And then Module 3 is kind of the boring stuff, the nonconformities, the administration and procedures, and then a glossary. As of Friday of last week, Julie and I have actually received draft Module 1 and Module 2. It is in just a Word format. It's not pretty. It's 266 pages. We have not had an opportunity to review that language since last
week.
Friday.
Yeah.
We've then drafted, between Julie and I, we've drafted kind of a timeline as we see this over the next, I guess, 8 months it is now. First, here in March, we're providing you with this update and this timeline. In April, the staff work groups will meet to review and discuss the draft language. Then in May, ZoneCo is actually coming into town. They will be meeting with the staff and community work groups to go through that draft language, to have discussions, conversation, debate, perhaps, and the work groups will provide feedback. ZoneCo is considering putting together then a storyboard. I think all of you are familiar with the fabulous storyboards that Julie's team has put together for other things that will help us explain kind of what the draft ordinance says versus the previous ordinance. In June then, staff, and by staff I mean Julie and I, will create and post a series of kind of educational videos to get people on a baseline. I think Councilmember O'Malley, you brought this up at a previous study session. So having some podcast type conversation about what is planning, what is zoning, why is it important, what's the comp plan, and how is that different than zoning? Why is the city going through this process? Why did you think that it was important? What are some of the goals of the zoning update? So kind of to set the stage for that. In July, we will provide a summary of the draft ordinance to the council, and we'll outline our public engagement activities that we've come up with. Right now, we're thinking of things like, and then the public engagement will take place throughout the rest of the summer and into the fall. Obviously, your typical Minnetonka memo, social media posts, tabling at the farmers market, Ridgedale Mall, sports tournaments. I was not part of the last comp plan update, but they did planning and pints at the local breweries, just being where people are. We're thinking about doing some virtual planning hours, which would include daytime, nighttime, and weekend time, where staff just has time. We're logged into a virtual meeting setting. People can pop in, they can ask questions, they can give feedback. We've actually done that only once before, but it worked really well for the Walser Kia project that was controversial, that people had a lot of questions about. It just worked really well for people who couldn't or didn't want to come into City Hall to talk with a planner. So we're thinking about that. And then some videos, just driving around town, showing the diversity of what we already have, and asking people how they feel about those things. Throughout those months, there will continue to be editing done on the draft ordinances. So I don't want to imply that here's the draft and this is what we're going to work with. But as we continue to get feedback, changes made. Then at the October study session, we will plan to provide a final draft of the ordinance to the council, as well as what we heard from the feedback for all of those public engagement activities. And then the end of the year comes and we have Planning Commission public hearings. We were thinking about 2 Planning Commission public hearings. Perhaps the council wants to be involved in one of those first hearings. It's a joint hearing. We can talk more about that as we approach that, and then final council consideration. Obviously, this is kind of fluid, but these are the things that we're targeting for the next rest of the year, I guess.
Then we'll write the comprehensive plan.
Then we'll start on the comprehensive plan. I should say following, if the council adopts an updated zoning ordinance of some kind, the next step will actually be a lot of, again, education. Just as we did education to ground them in what is zoning, now education, and by them I mean residents, property owners, developers, planning commissioners, talking about, okay, now we have a new ordinance, these are the things you need to know. So that is a step that I just thought of right now. So. And that's all I have for my presentation, so I turn it back to the mayor.
Thank you, Susan.
Oh.
Good work. All right, questions about where things are at here? Patsy, go ahead.
So I was just wondering if, and this might be too big of an ask, but you know, at the stage when you're doing a lot of the educational videos and stuff, is that if there are if there are going to be changes, like if that could be included in terms of so that people, because it just seems like before the public engagement activities occur, like during those, is that possible?
Like things to highlight? Is
Yeah.
that what you're saying?
Yeah, like what
Okay.
what people are gonna see.
Yeah.
Okay.
And like, what are the impacts?
I think that's a great idea, and I think that part of that storyboard that we're hoping to put online is also to do that highlighting. We want to have public engagement. We had public engagement, if you remember, last summer and fall to really just get general feedback on what people like about Minnetonka, what they would be comfortable seeing changed, what they want to see changed. So we did that public engagement last year. And we've been holding off now because we want to be able to provide people something to engage with. And so I think that having that draft ordinance, having the storyboard, and having some of those videos, I think that's a really good idea.
Yep. Try to help people understand what they should be paying attention to and
Yeah.
why.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
They
Give 'em a
probably don't
reason.
care about how many, the width of the parking lot striping, but they might care about what's the minimum square footage of
A lot.
a lot?
Yeah.
What is
Yeah,
the new setback?
exactly, that's it.
So those things that we know people are going to care about.
Yeah.
Anything else? Otherwise, I have one. Paula, go ahead.
Just, oh gosh, I don't even like to even talk about this, but given the pending or potential state legislation, is that changing our approach or anything that is?
I can't hear you, Paul.
So given the pending legislation, what's going on at the state, all the text message I've been getting since we started this meeting, is that, we have the same question, how is that impacting all of this? Or are we just gonna kinda wait and see?
Yeah, I'll start and then Julie will add and change or
Thank you.
amend what I'm saying.
I don't know yet.
I think we have, throughout the last year and the beginning of this year, we have told Zone Co. about things that are percolating in the legislature. They work nationally. We're not the only, state that things are percolating in. So we keep them abreast of what's being talked about. From my perspective, I don't think that there's a reason to necessarily stop what we're doing right now as part of our review of the ordinance. I think that there's a lot of good ordinance changes that could happen independent of the housing conversation that I think are worthwhile continuing on. We did talk briefly about this earlier today, and maybe it's as things move through the legislature, as we have maybe a better, I don't know, I want to say understanding, but we see the path. Maybe it's near the end of this timeline that we have to do a pause. I personally would hate for all the good work that we've started to just pause, not knowing what will happen at the legislature.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to what Susan said is there's different timeframes attached to some of these ideas that they have, like compliance by a certain date or whatever, and let's just say they say 27 or 28. You can always go back and amend let's just say there's a slew of changes that you want more time to kind of digest and figure out how you're going to implement them. I can think of one particular one where I'm scratching my head a little bit how to implement some of this draft legislation. So you might need more time to digest it, so you might adapt this and then go back and amend, or if it's just in time and you have enough time to consider it, you could probably get it written into this. So it just depends on timing, what the legislation is, how complicated it is to change in the ordinance, those sorts of things. And I don't think we know those answers yet.
I think also, wouldn't you say that it depends on what the legislation is actually impacting? Is it impacting the comp plan where it says you have to have a certain amount of your city guided for X density?
Mhm.
That's a comp plan situation and some zoning follow-up. But depending on when things happen, those are things we can talk about when we do the comp plan. So,
And the deadlines that they lay out in the legislation. So
Thank you.
question answered with, it depends.
Clear as mud.
That's right now, yes.
So start thinking about who wants to volunteer to be on the comp plan.
Yes,
All
that
right,
recruitment
so-
starts today.
Anything else, council? Otherwise, we're cruising right along.
Okay.
All right, excellent.
Thank you,
So we'll
Susan.
do a little shift
You can
in
stay
our
up here if you want.
presenters.
Okay. We need
And
a little
we'll
time
move
to.
along to the short-term rental research. Mike, are you gonna start this or kick it off to Julie?
Yeah, I can be, Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I can be real brief. So with your 2026 study session work plan that was approved, we had scheduled to bring this item forward. And so staff been working on this report for some time for tonight's presentation. And I think Julie will introduce the folks that are presenting here tonight, mainly covering what was in the staff report just in terms of a kind of comprehensive overview of short-term rentals. Also want to note that there was an addenda, so I don't want to be remiss in mentioning that. So Councilmember Romali had sent some information over to me to be distributed to the council. So I'd sent that out earlier today, not realizing there was a revise after that, and so so you got a follow-up email from me once I realized there was a follow-up to that, and then talking with the attorney, just want to make sure it's part of the record, so it is an official addenda. And so that's presented to you here this evening with that information. I think even Ms. Romali had also printed that out perhaps and have provided that as well. And so with that, I'd really kick it over to Julie and her team to start tonight's presentation. And then I think at the end of it, we're just looking for direction on next steps.
Perfect, yes, and we have a slide to prompt you at the end to remind you. I think I brought Alicia Gray, obviously Housing and Economic Development Manager. We also have Kendall Larson here, who is the Housing Coordinator. And you've seen both of them before, but I just want to add, there's also Susan, she's sitting back here now, but it's kind of us four who talk about these issues and try to get the information in a distillable form for you to all kind of digest, and not too long of a staff report. But we have been working on this for a while. It's been at least a couple of months of homework, mostly Kendall. Thank you, Kendall, for doing all of that. But I think basically we want to tell you about what's happening in the world of short-term rentals as we know it in the nation, and then distill it down to the state, and then of course go local and try to tell you what's been going on in Minnetonka, and hopefully at the end give you some choices as a council, and then kind of give you our feedback as staff members, as I'm sure we do with everything. So go for it, Kendall, and
Perfect.
Alicia and I might chime in here and there, and we've kind of practiced those locations, so go for it.
Sounds good. To start out with, just giving a definition of what we use as a short-term rental. So the city defines a short-term rental as a property in which the owner rents all or a part of their home to guests for less than 30 days. Many, as you probably have seen all around, there's a bunch of different platforms that people use, but the most popular ones are Homestay, Airbnb, and VRBO. To rent out their properties. And as Julie mentioned, communities across the country and locally have been researching and exploring regulatory options for short-term rentals. And so we will start first with looking at the national kind of conversation and kind of looking at it from a really high level nationally. And so there's a lot of conversations out there talking about short-term rentals in different parts of the country. And a lot of them specifically are looking to address the impact on the housing market. That's one of the biggest topics. And so research has shown that short-term rentals are prevalent in places that, attract tourism, have high income earners, have high value properties, a lot of places that are city centers and have really good transit to move around. And there are also, there's a lot of research that there's some research that was done by the Congressional Research Service to kind of help policymakers at the federal level look at this topic. And so the big items that they noted in their research was the impact on the housing prices, so really looking at the converting of single-family homes from either long-term rentals or owner properties into short-term rentals, and looking at that, the increase of the pricing in housing, not just for the purchase of homes, but also the impact that those Airbnb and others have on rental prices as well. And then, of course, looking at kind of the supply question. And they note in there that it's really impacts locally, so you have to look at a local market to see how short-term rentals might impact a local market. Some local markets have a lot of supply, so it might not be as big of an issue in a community who is on the opposite of that, who may not have the supply. Also, an impact on the hotel industry. That's where a lot of people do weekend holidays, but Airbnb is now an option, or short-term rentals are another flexible alternative to staying in a hotel. So there is some, not necessarily concern, but something to look at in terms of policy at that federal level is how that can impact, that competition can impact the hotel industry. And then, of course, looking at the impact on local tourism, the economic benefit behind short-term rentals in supporting the tourism that some communities see, and how that's beneficial. And then also it notes in the research looking at the apps themselves that are used, the platforms, and looking at price transparency and online platform liability are things that Congress has considered taking action on, whether they have or not. But those are just some federal policy level items. And then just briefly, the kind of two items that I touched on before, but that economic benefit of short-term rentals, looking at the individual level, the property owner level impact for them having additional revenue from a short-term rental, but also for communities having that benefit of, if there's increased tourism or more people coming to their community, staying in their community even for a short period of time, that it is, they're spending in the community when they're there. So on that economic benefit side there. And then also, of course, you have to consider the impact on the housing market. And so looking specifically at those, increased rent prices, the decrease in supply in local markets, and then the impact of just housing prices in general. So that is what we have been seeing. There's also, of course, regulations happening across the country, different styles of regulation, from bans to permits and licenses, and kind of everything in between. So there's a variety out there, which we will touch on in the local section. So looking at the kind of local conversations in the Twin Cities region, there are lots of communities that researched that are taking steps to regulate short-term rentals, really looking to address community concerns about safety, nuisance, and noise and traffic. And so one of the examples we point out here is Wayzata, since it's our neighbor, that previous to their approving an ordinance in September of 2025, they were toward the least restrictive end. You can see it on your screen is a graph that actually comes from a discussion in August of 2025 when they were discussing this and deciding what to do going forward. And so it's just a good example of kind of looking at specifically the Lake Minnetonka area. And there's a lot of different, from most restrictive to least restrictive, and so there's some that fall in between the most restrictive and least restrictive. And so Wayzata, as an example, they did a lot of research, a lot of community engagement, and they went forward with adopting an ordinance in September of 25 to prohibit short-term rentals, and then that would go into effect in April of 26, so coming up here in a few months.
Kendall, just something to point out here before you get to your last bullet. So again, if you're not catching this graphic, and there's you can blow it up a little bit better in your packet. So each city is identified in the colored area for what kind of regulation it has. So just so in case you missed that or you couldn't see it because they are kind of small print, just want to make sure you saw those cities are identified. And I think, is it 13? I don't know, we have something like 13 in that analysis that Wayzata did. Sorry, you can jump to your last point.
Yeah, my last point, I'm actually tossing it over to Eric here, but that Wayzata and Apple Valley and Bloomington were all sued due to the bans on short-term rentals, so I don't know.
Sure. Just provide an update on the lawsuits?
Yeah.
Sure. So Apple Valley and Bloomington are both in the lawsuits were consolidated into one. It's a federal court lawsuit. And it's an individual who purchased property with the intention of using them as short-term rentals, actually after Bloomington has prohibited them. So Bloomington has prohibited short-term rentals since 2015, and this individual bought property there then and is challenging the ordinance on a takings theory. I don't think that's a terribly strong argument, but that case is pending. The case that's more pertinent to your consideration is the Wayzata case. That's a situation where the city, as Kendall noted, did allow for short-term rentals through a licensing regime prior to adopting a prohibition. They adopted their regulation in their rental licensing codes, and that was very key from their perspective. And I can address maybe a bit of sort of the licensing versus zoning dynamic. They put an effective date of April 2026 intentionally because their existing licenses, which licenses are issued to a person or an operator, and they are subject to annual renewal, all of their existing licenses expire in March. And so when the ordinance goes into effect, those will have all expired. They were sued. The lawsuit is really, in my mind, going to get at the crux of regulation in this area, which is the question of licensing versus zoning when you're approaching the regulation of short-term rentals. So just to back up real quick, and I'm sure many of you already know this, but it bears repeating. A licensing regime, a business license in this case, is adopted pursuant to a city's police powers. It's issued to a person. And so that's why often when you have licenses that are issued for certain businesses, the highly regulated businesses, their background checks of the operators, criminal background checks and other things. They're subject to annual renewal, and then they can be suspended or revoked for bad behavior or poor management. Flip of that is a zoning regulation is adopted pursuant to the state law enabling authority in the Municipal Planning Act. So the Municipal Planning Act provides the enabling authority for all cities in the state to zone and plan. And there's processes then that when you adopt something as a zoning ordinance, it has to go through a separate, more involved process to adopt it. There's a required public hearing at the Planning Commission, for example. And then key is a zoning ordinance runs with the land. It's not issued to a person, it runs with the land. And so somebody who buys a piece of property that has zoning entitlements on it assumes those rights, as opposed to a license, which is not transferable. So each new owner comes anew and has to apply and be eligible on their own. And then with zoning too, you have to recognize non-conforming rights. So in short, non-conforming rights are grandfathered rights. And that's when a use is legally established under a regulatory regime at some point in the past. The rules change and would no longer qualify or be legal under current rules, and the city has to recognize their right to continue. And there's limited exceptions, but essentially they can continue indefinitely, assuming they haven't discontinued the use or it's destroyed by natural peril and some other circumstances. So the Wayzata case is the crux of that lawsuit is that Wayzata says we've adopted our short-term rentals as a business regulation. We're regulating this business. It's adopted in our licensing codes. We have the police power to do that. And so they didn't conduct a public hearing at the Planning Commission. They're not going to recognize the properties that are currently conducting short-term rental businesses, hence their effective date as well. And the flip of that is the plaintiffs are arguing that it doesn't matter what you call it, your ordinance, or where you say it's placed. This is a zoning ordinance, and they get into some of the definitional aspects of the Municipal Planning Act. It's a zoning ordinance. You didn't follow the process to adopt it properly. You're going to have to recognize grandfathered rights. And alternatively, their argument is that you've effectuated a taking. And so
You
the city.
effectuated what?
A taking, a regulatory
A
taking.
taking.
And so the city needs to engage in a condemnation process to compensate the property owners. That's going to be, that's boiling it all down. That's going to be the question. So the court's going to look at it. It's in district court right now. It's in front of Judge Klein, Hennepin County District Court. They actually have dispositive motion hearing on Friday. It's March 6th. The judge will have 90 days to issue a decision, up to 90 days. So we could expect a decision no later than maybe Memorial Day. And it's almost certain to be appealed, regardless of which way it goes, but I think it will give us some really good guidance, at least some initial guidance on that notion of licensing versus zoning. And that's also why you see some of the varied approaches there. You can see some of these that are a clear licensing, attempted licensing approach, and some that are zoning, and some that are kind of a combination of both. So for example, the mound regulations, the red portion of the graph, was sort of a combination of both, but it's in their zoning code, and so they're recognizing the existing short-term rentals. They've essentially grandfathered those in. That has its own policy considerations, because by doing that, you're kind of effectively creating a monopoly situation. So there are many things to think about. That depending on the route you go, and assuming it's a legally sustainable route ultimately, then there are going to be a lot of other considerations involved in sort of figuring out how you might go. And creating that record, as Kendall has talked about, is going to ultimately be the key for any defense, right? So it's doing your community engagement, getting all perspectives and having all that information in the record, taking the time to do that. Wayzata's got a really good record for their defense. They really did do a lot of engagement. And so it's complicated, but I do think this decision is going to be enlightening.
So why you stew about what Eric just
Yep.
described? Because I think that's the kind of end discussion, like when you're going to have to talk about where you're headed with this, where you are as a council in terms of where your consensus is about how to regulate. So sit on that for a minute while Kendall kind of just goes through a couple of different slides about other things that she found in her research, and then we'll get back to what Eric was talking about in a little bit.
Perfect. So still on this local conversations, looking at the lake communities as examples, only kind of represents one part of Minnetonka's geography. And so looking at some of the other suburban communities as well that might also reflect other parts of Minnetonka, there were a variety of regulations used, as you saw on the last slide, and then also here in this graph, that the different types of regulations used, from full-on prohibit, as we just talked a little bit about, but prohibiting them, but allowing existing, all of those different things, allowing with a license, allowing but restricted to only homesteaded or owner-occupied, or allowing with a license but are restricted to very specific sections or very specific zones in a city. Looking at getting even more local to Minnetonka, you can see on here that it's been short-term rentals have been a part of discussions for a while in the city, and there has been some additional research done by the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis, put together a property tool looking at investor-owned properties, and they use data from non-homesteaded property data. And then it doesn't differentiate between short-term and long-term, but to give a picture about kind of what the investor-owned properties look like in Minnetonka, you can see that Minnetonka, out of I think about 18,000 non-homesteaded properties, that about 584 are considered investor-owned. This takes into consideration not just single-family home, but condo and townhome as well.
18,000 units.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yes, thank you. 18,000 units.
Just making sure.
And that, so you can see it's a very small percentage, about 3.2% of that share of those non-homesteaded units that are investor-owned in the city. Looking specifically at our data, using the rental registration, there's around 25 short-term rentals registered with the city. Most of them are owned by Minnesota residents, so people living within the Twin Cities or even in Minnetonka or surrounding communities. And then also just to point out that when two properties did their annual renewal this year, two that were previously short-term rentals renewed as long-term rentals. And then we also used AirDNA data. AirDNA is an analytical company that looks at, I believe, Airbnb and VRBO to look at what's kind of happening in communities and getting data on those short-term rentals. And so they indicated there's about 24 unique rentals in Minnetonka, that the average daily rate is about $406 per night for Minnetonka. Looking at the minimum stay for those 24 units, about 92% of stays last between 2 and 6 nights, so that quick stays. And then also that about 58% occupancy rate, so they're not consistently rented out necessarily, but in addition, looking at the annual availability, just over half of the units were available for more than 271 days, so a little over 3/4, I think, of the year. And then looking at the distribution of the size of the homes, you can see by bedroom size, it's pretty proportional. So it's not one way or the other for the size of the homes.
Not a certain housing type.
Yeah, not a certain housing type, it's kind of all over. In addition, looking at some Airbnb reviews, just doing a quick search, looking through, their overall renters were very pleased with their experiences in Airbnbs in the community. Reviews commented on things like the cleanliness of the places, the good neighborhoods, the quiet neighborhoods, the host hospitality, and then also a few reviews also noted some of their reasons for staying, and so you can see things like people here for work trips or for staycations or just general vacation to the city, and also coming to visit family for holidays or different life events. And so, reviews can be an indicator sometimes when you're looking through them of if there's problems in short-term rentals. If they don't get good reviews, of course, and that impacts their ability to rent out. And so, yeah.
Or from the landlord too.
Or from the landlord too,
Yeah.
And then looking at complaints and calls for service for the properties that are registered. There weren't many, as you can see here, that about 8 had police calls for service. We're looking at the time during when they were registered. And so that includes all types of incidences. That's not just disturbance-related calls. It could be any call that comes in. And then
like a medical.
like a medical, a gas concern, if they smell gas odor, if a door was left open, or whatever it may be. And then none of the properties had nuisance complaints submitted to the city during the registered period.
And I neglected to put in the community survey results that you had last year, so we ran out of time last week. So we threw it in the slide just so you remember. We asked a bunch of, I would call them nuisance-related questions, and you asked about your garbage can issue, your overnight parking. We continue to watch this over time now that you've added it, and also the short-term rental issues. So you're seeing how much community concern you have regarding these issues. So we thought it was helpful as you look at tonight's materials that you had that overall citywide perspective as well. Thanks.
Of course. And then looking at kind of what the options are, that the first one here is to continue to monitor through the rental registry program and to review annually at our annual housing study session. You could regulate through zoning, regulate through licensing, or prohibit entirely. So those are kind of the options. And then just staff's analysis and conclusion. There's pros and cons, of course. The pros looking really at, for owners, that economic benefit of renting out their home or, having another option if they have to leave the community but they're going to return back later or whatever it may be. There's that economic benefit for owners, for renters. There's a variety of reasons that I have already pointed on in a few slides ago. Having an alternative to a hotel, you know, if they need a bigger place to host family for a holiday, needing a kitchen or just somewhere closer to relatives that there might not be other options, or maybe they just want to have a place that feels like home. And then of course there are economic benefits to communities, as I mentioned, you know, that tourism aspect and spending in the community. The cons, looking that short-term renters can sometimes be viewed as bringing more people to a property than there might be previously, causing some differences in the surrounding area. The lack of owner-occupied property can be viewed negatively, as an owner may not be aware of issues happening at a property. And again, looking at that impact on the housing market and rental prices dependent on the local market, and trying to understand what that looks like. And then of course our analysis found that short-term rentals, you know, do represent a relatively small share of the housing in the city, and may not rise to the level of specific regulation. There haven't been a lot of significant calls or nuisance complaints, and the complaints that we would get could be addressed by existing ordinances or regulations. We're tracking them through the rental registration program now, and that it offers a variety of lodging options that might not be available around. So with that.
So at this point, Mayor, we want a couple of things maybe to help you with your discussion. You know, maybe trying to identify your main concerns. What exactly are you trying to address with whatever ordinance or regulation that you want? And then truly, is there a consensus from you all to regulate? Because the discussions over the past, I'm going to say back to 2017, and we were reflecting on why was 2017 important. It was when the Super Bowl was here, and there were a lot of short-term rentals happening at that time. And then I think that was the Final Four here too.
Final Four in 2019.
Yeah, so there continued to be kind of these events that were causing some of that conversation. So that was what was happening back then. But what was that?
The Ryder Cup.
A Ryder Cup, yeah, right. So there were lots of big things that were drawing tourists to our region, and I think that's where the council was talking about it. They never could quite get to consensus though. So I think that's, from a staff perspective, it's never been like, we're going to do this. So I think we need to kind of, if you're ready to move ahead, then we need consensus on how to regulate the short-term rental, because what will happen when you answer that second question, we can kind of tell you what the forward-looking time frame looks like. So depending on what kind of regulation we want, will dictate the time frame in which we think we can address it. And then if regulations are pursued, then maybe just talk a little bit about your expectations as a council about how much engagement. We know what we do on other ordinances that we propose. We often do Minnetonka Matters, and we do direct mailings to people who are impacted, that sort of thing. So just talk about that. So I don't want to be too, directive, but those are the questions we had prepared.
Oh, that's helpful. Okay, let's first start with council. Any questions? Well, first of all, Kendall, thank you very much. Obviously, a lot of work went into this, and so really appreciate it. You found it useful. Council questions?
Eric, yeah, I do.
Go ahead, Paula.
Eric, regarding the lawsuit, so Wayzata has a blanket prohibition, correct? They don't have a non-owner occupied, exemption, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
And just in your opinion, does that make a difference in terms of standing and the anticipated, kind of legal action that one could expect? Because there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 7 cities on Lake Minnetonka that ban outright, versus 3 that ban except for 3.5 that ban except for homesteaded owner-occupied property is. So is there a difference?
Sure. Yeah,
in
so
that sort of.
I'm trying to remember there's a whole bunch of plaintiffs in the Wayzata lawsuit, and I think most of them are out-of-state owners.
Yep.
And so they're out-of-state owners. There are some that are in-state or maybe even.
But not in Wayzata.
Not in Wayzata.
Yeah.
Yes, I think we can fairly confidently say, if it's just a flat prohibition, no recognition of any existing rights, you will likely get sued. I mean, that's pretty fair to say. That's been the landscape of what we've seen. And so something less than that, of course, it's not a guarantee that you won't. It's going to depend on how you craft it very carefully, who the plaintiffs are and what their current property interests or rights are, and then what they might not have after the application of the ordinance would likely dictate, how we would be standing. But something less than outright prohibition, sure.
Because
it
Bloomington
could
and
be
Apple
said.
Valley both also have outright prohibition, is my understanding, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and those are the three that have had litigation
Correct.
and challenge.
And,
Okay.
and there is again, the Bloomington and Apple Valley lawsuit, that is also approaching an oral argument date. I can't remember what it is.
Sure.
So it very much, as I think as the slide said, pending. And then of course, Wayzata, they'll be arguing on Friday.
Right,
So-
so I just wanted to clarify that those are all with blanket prohibitions.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. That was one question. I can wait until.
So Deb, you have a question?
Yeah, I have maybe a couple. So one is, when we think of investor-owned, is that always like what does that mean exactly? Because I remember years ago, people upset about reverse mortgage, like bank-owned properties.
Right.
And so I'm just, what does that mean?
So the Federal Reserve on their NICE tool, and you can actually ask it different questions. So there's actually a drill down if you want to look at just townhomes or you just want to look at single family or whatever. And then it also, how many homes they own. It's more than, you can look at just bank owned, you can look at 2 properties they own up to 100. So, and anywhere in between. So it lets you kind of choose. I think the point we were trying to make in the report, and we've looked at this before, we've talked about this when you had your housing study, I think we showed you this too last time. If you think about all the issues facing Minnetonka, is investor own, one of the higher issues, or is it probably not as strong as it is in other locations? It's not as strong here, and we can tell that by comparing communities. So on that map, the darker the area, the more often people are doing investor-owned properties. So we look at that in the short-term rental arena because you want to look, are they buying up all these houses for this purpose? And we just don't see that. And we don't see it because we're not seeing the same geography, and we're also not seeing the same type of housing being picked up. So and we went through every single address of where these places are. So you just don't see that phenomena happening. I think a lot of people are talking about it, and it's all over the region. And there are areas of the Twin Cities this is happening. It's just not happening here.
But for the purposes of this, to clarify, I think what Deb's asking, which is, an investor could be, a couple got married, they each had a house, and now they've converted one of their houses to a short-term rental, and it's for the purposes of this tool, this would be.
You'd have to own 2 properties that way, not just one in addition to your home. You'd
Okay.
have to have 2 in that entity.
Interesting.
Yeah, and do you miss, because people do lots of LLCs, sure, but what you're trying to do is get a gut, right, with this tool. It's not foolproof.
And Deb, you have another question?
Yeah, I do. So, Paula, I think, has been sort of spearheading the discussion because I'm sure you're hearing from people, and so one of the things that I've been thinking about is I think it's clearly more of an issue in, Lakeside, or, near certain kinds of amenities than others, and I think one thing that would be, so more of an issue in maybe part of Ward 3, much more so than in Ward 1, say. So, and so I'm just, I'm
that a
sort of
question?
wondering about, well, I'm sort of wondering, like, when, if we're thinking about zoning or trying to get at the root of sort of being surgical in our approach in Minnetonka, is there a way to do that? Because it will so disproportionately affect this sliver of the city. And maybe other, you know, we have other lakes in Minnetonka with lakeside property, so I.
They're also a small proportion, you know.
So Deb, your question is there a way to be more prescriptive about how we're doing this?
Yeah, like, is there a way to think about, I mean, is there a way to think about it to sort of get at the parts of the city that would be disproportionately affected and maybe minimize the possibility of litigation because.
Okay, Julie?
being surgical?
Yeah, the only thing I would offer, and you know, we've kind of gone through the mapping of all of this,
Yeah.
so I think that might be the thought. So less than 100 lakeshore, Minnetonka lakeshore properties-ish.
Doesn't count deeded access.
We're gonna,
Yeah.
one person's gonna talk at a
Okay.
time, okay?
Yeah, so my point is, if you look at all of the lakeshore property, like one right on the lake, okay, out of 25. You look at near the lake, you pick up a couple of more. If you look at Minnetonka in general, it truly, I'm looking at the map right now, it's very spread out.
Okay.
And so if your question is, can it be surgical like one geography of the city? You aren't gonna pick up all of what short-term rentals are in Minnetonka. 25 are not all on the lake. So I think that's the impression maybe some people have, but that's not actually what has happened. Are there a grouping of them? Yes, but not on the lake. There's one on the lake. So,
Eric?
Sure. Deb, I might just reference and piggybacking on what Julie said. If you're thinking about this from a zoning perspective, which if you're talking about sort of geographic
Yeah.
tailoring is zoning, there's a provision at the very beginning of the Municipal Planning Act, which provides that essentially you have to, in order to, when you're talking about uses and regulating uses from a zoning perspective, you have to do it uniformly. So if you have a particular zoning district with a particular type of use, that use needs to be treated the same wherever it's located in the city. So it really kind of limits your ability to tailor based on geography from a zoning perspective. You know, there's a part of me when I look at the legal arguments, I still think of this as more of a business regulation, the Wayzata sort of defense,
Yeah.
that it's more of a rental licensing type of approach that you're really doing. But the idea of geographic tailoring is difficult there too.
Right.
Because you have to, you're going to have to treat all applicants that are similarly situated the same, or else you get into sort of equal protection arguments and some of those things. So it's tough to do that.
So Rebecca, that just brought up one other question. So thinking about licensing, in our materials, it talked about cities that have licensing. Licensing was one thing, permitting was another. And we're not a city that does rental licensing yet anyway. And I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about, if we're going, I don't know the nuance, like, between permitting and licensing, but what would that require? I mean, would we have to launch the rental licensing then and,
Right.
Oi.
Right. Mayor, if I may.
Go ahead.
I think we talked about this as a group while we were preparing for today. You could probably figure out a way to subcategorize short-term rentals. Eric was in this discussion when we talked about it, where you just license short-term rentals and don't do the whole rental scheme. And that is what held the council back in 2019 when they talked about it, because they were talking about short-term rentals then. And in 2019, they said, yeah, we're not ready to do rental licensing in general, so we're just not even ready to cover short-term rentals. So that kind of was the same discussion. I think, and again, with Eric's nodding, I think we could write a subset of licensing just to license short-term rentals. And then it would be a smaller program, obviously, just for 25 or how many ever were available at that time, so.
Other questions? I have a question, if we did that, I mean, I'm thinking about the cannabis licensing, right? Like, theoretically, we could say we've got 30 short-term rental licenses available.
Yeah,
and
you do that a
there-
lot, yeah.
Or, you know, there's 8 per ward available. We could do something like that. I mean, is that something that's a possibility?
Well, let me tell you the history, and then you answer the question. So the history is you've done it with liquor. You know, you say up to 12 liquor stores. You've done it with tobacco. You say whatever's available. Right now, we're down to 5 exclusive tobacco stores. So you've had that policy for some time. And then obviously with cannabis, but that was a state law, so that was different. But go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, Mayor, I think that is one of those middle ground approaches if you're looking at something in between the poles of, you know, allowing, registering, but just allowing and monitoring versus an outright prohibition. That's one, you know, something in between, and you could do a cap. And some of the other industries mentioned, typically those caps are also buffered by spacing requirements of some sort. So it does sort of set up the map once
So they don't
they
move.
start operating, right.
Right, so they're not concentrated.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So you need a, you know, you need a rational basis for your cap and how it applies, but that can be something.
So
to
in
consider.
Stillwater, they do a cap of 50 outside the CBD.
Got it.
Yep.
All right, let's go back to the questions then that you have queued up for us. So the first one is what are the main concerns regarding short-term rentals? So Paula, do you want to
Yeah, I do.
hit that?
Thank you. So the main concerns is that looking at the chart, which is a little bit more readable, I think, than what was presented in the staff report. Again, we in Minnetonka Beach are the only communities around Lake Minnetonka that do not regulate and do not regulate short-term rentals at all. While it's a small percentage of Minnetonka, yet we have more lakeshore properties that this can potentially impact than Minnetonka Beach, than Excelsior, than Spring Park, than Wayzata, than Greenwood, than Woodland. We have almost as many as, you know, just by I'm not saying it was a pinpoint count, but, you know, going through and looking at the satellite imagery, have almost as many as Deep Haven. We don't have as many as Mound. We don't have as many as Orono, and we don't have as many as Tonka Bay. We probably have about half as what those Tonka Bay and Mound, and a lot less than Orono. So, you know, this is something that, you know, does impact, at my count, 140 lakeshore properties or have access to lake, like they may be right across the street and they have a dock, and that doesn't include all of the deeded access docks, which is that, you know, there's a dock and there's maybe 10 or 12 slips. The houses for that are across the street or just up, you know, a couple of houses away. And so those are all of the properties that, you know, could be impacted. Now, we know that there's not a lot of corporate rentals right now, but corporate means more than 2. So that could be like the guy who just bought the house next door to me, who owns Minnesota Hot Tubs. He may not own many more than 1, but so he's not considered corporate. He lives in Mound. He can't do short-term rentals in Mound, and so he came and bought in Minnetonka because they're not regulated here. And, you know, as more and more, yes, there's, you know, other places have less shoreline. We only have 3% of shoreline, but we are very dense in what we have compared to other communities. So 140 in the amount of shoreline that we have, and that includes Libbs Lake, by the way, which has direct access to Lake Minnetonka as well. So all you do is go through a narrow channel from Libbs Lake. So that's really considered Lake Minnetonka by most people who live here. So, you know, it does impact a lot of people, and a lot of those houses are older. They're 1,500 square foot like mine, that are getting sold, like my neighbors, like, you know, people, you know, and they're getting bought up. If not now, this may not be a concern right now, but it could be a concern in the future. And if we want to avoid a situation like Wayzata or other places where, you know, we say, you know, this conversation where we, you know, grandfather in or something like that, then we are opening ourselves up to that situation if we don't regulate now and be proactive and forward thinking about this for those residents, you know, like me, and talking about, you know, complaints. I had drunken teenagers next door to me all summer. Did I call the police every time? No, because there wasn't going to be something that could be done. I've talked to other neighbors who have had the same thing. And so they don't call the police. I mean, you don't, because it's just a party. What's going to get done? Nothing ever gets done. So that doesn't mean it doesn't impact your quality of life. My husband had to save a life of one of these kids who passed out in the lake over the summer. So, you know, it does impact people's quality of life. And so looking at the other communities that do this, we have non-lakeside communities, Edina, Egan, Bloomington, Apple Valley, St. Louis Park, you know, all ban outright. Prior Lake bans less than 60 days. As was said, Stillwater allows a maximum of 50 STRs outside the central business district and requires a license. You know, others, you know, do allow but requires license. There's very few, if any, that don't have any regulation at all. And I think, you know, some of the studies and research beyond the 2025 congressional report, which is 2025 Congressional Staff Research Report, which, sorry, I don't mean to throw shadows on the current administration and their researchers, but there may be skewed visions in that. You know, I presented and shared with you all studies from respected journals and academic resources from the Cornell Journal of Law and Public Policy that notes the impact on, you know, housing availability, you know, others by an author who is one of the leading experts in short-term rentals and how they affect communities. The Mid-America Regional Council, you know, that states that the increasing body of evidence that this is an issue and it's becoming a greater issue. The Journal of Urban Economics, you know, also discussing this as an issue of negative impact. The Urban Institute, we're talking about the impact on having disparate negative aspects on renters and people of color and lower income residents. And then Granicus, our own Granicus, and this is by one of the AICPs, you know, one of the leading AICPs, who's an urban planner and designer, one of North America's leading authorities on short-term rentals and how they impact communities. He's written extensively on best practices for cities and the author of an article in the New York Times and Planning Magazine, and he argues for establishing primary residency as a requirement as the most direct tool that can be used to address housing issues. And you know, I summarize why in here, and that was the original intent of Airbnb and Vrbo, is for home sharing, not investor rentals. And so, you know, I would point this out as considerations to help frame our discussion. And, you know, the considerations are that it does impact us. Is it a huge impact? No, but, you know, we're looking at all impacts. And it does, you know, disproportionately impact lower income renters, people of color. You know, again, corporate owned does not mean non-investor owned properties. Going back to, you know, anything over 2 is corporate. That means, you know, people who live in Mound or who live in, you know, Minneapolis and then have their short-term rentals here, they're still absent. They're absentee landlords. You know, the community and character and quality of life. When we have, you know, no, we don't have a lot right now, but this could become an issue in the future. And it is impacting quality of life for some people, especially those in or near the lake, which is our tourist destination. You know, lawsuits, again, you know, it looks like if there's some compromise and middle ground from here, we can minimize the risk of that. And I think in a 2017 memo is, you know, concerned about staff times and comparing to Duluth, which currently has 700 units.
I'm gonna ask you to wrap it up and
Yes.
vote, so some other folks can weigh in.
Yep, well, I think it's important to kind of get this perspective out there, and I think the most important factor is that we discussed this in July 2025. I provided a link or a time marker for audio, at which point we did provide direction and come to consensus that there was, you know, Mayor Wiersum did basically direct us to go forward and to look at, you know, an ordinance in Q1 of 2026. And the main question seemed to be whether that would be a outright ban or if it would be something like Excelsior and Orono and other communities are doing. So, you know, those are the things that I would like to ask council to consider as we move forward in this discussion.
Kathy?
I was gonna say, I do have some concerns, about the short-term rentals. When we're talking about investors coming in, I know that we said we don't have a big problem right now, it's a small problem. But as we start to think about, the incentive program to have elders sell their homes and, try to get younger people to come in to purchase homes, I just thinking forward, that may be a time where now we're gonna start having folks that can afford those homes come in and swoop them up really fast and purchase them and then maybe use them for short-term rentals. And so I think about that unless we put something in place to prevent that. But also, you know, I don't like the fact that we talked about the regulation of, there's something that I think Paula had said or someone had said it earlier about, kind of slipped my mind. It slipped my mind. But I know in other cities, like Minneapolis is one of those cities where there was a lot of investors who came in and purchased up a lot of property, and it made it really hard for people to rent because of their regulation. Matter of fact, my mom rented, I helped my mom navigate 2 different ones. I know Invitation Homes was one, and then there was another one. And I know that we don't have that problem here right now, but I do think about, like I said, when we start trying to put those incentives in place. So that's one thing I think about. And then, I mean, as far as the disparity piece, you know, as far as low income, affordable housing, we have that already. And so I don't know if the short-term rental will make it harder for people that's lower income to purchase home, because I mean we're having that problem already. So I don't think that would impact that. But yeah, I don't know. But I do have that concern. But if I did, I would probably lean more towards you know, owner occupied, short term, you know, rental. If I had to make a decision, I probably would prefer that if we're gonna do short term rental, it would be owner occupied, because I feel like, I think about this landlord that lives in Minnetonka who owns homes in Minneapolis, and she owns a lot of homes in Minneapolis. She lives in Minnetonka because I went to her house. And she just wasn't a good landlord. Like I told you, my daughter had to sue her and we had to go through this court stuff, and she won her case. But she owns a lot of property, and she didn't care about the property in Minneapolis. She did not. But her place out here in Minnetonka is really nice. And I think about stuff like that, and I don't know if she did short term, but I know she did long term rentals. And so I know when people come from other cities and they purchase property in your city and they're not here and they're not invested in the city, I can see how that happened because I've seen it happen. I saw how it played out in Minneapolis. So that is a concern for me too.
Deb, did you?
Yeah, I
Anyone?
mean, I sort of agree. I mean, I do have some concerns about preservation of naturally occurring affordable housing, which I think a lot of the time that might be, you know, sort of the way people might go, and just housing in general. I mean, we're struggling as it is to house our residents. So that's one concern, and I also agree that, I mean, personally, I'd be perfectly fine banning short-term rentals. In Minnetonka, but if we were to have short-term rentals, I would also lean towards owner-occupied, and I would want to sort of further stipulate that they would be there when the guests were there, not just that they're there most of the year, which technically means they're owner-occupied, but that they are there when the guests are there. I agree that when you have rentals of people that actually live there and live in the community, things tend to maintain just better standards. And in terms of public engagement, you know, I think the survey showed that it is not high on people's radar. I think in terms of public engagement, I think we'd at least want to reach out to the people that we know are already engaged in short-term rentals and get their feedback on it. I think it's probably prudent to do some kind of regulation. I don't know that I would just not pursue it. And I do recall the meeting with Mayor Wiersum, and I think there's wisdom in getting ahead of it before it does become an issue. I think sometimes things catch up with us and they're a surprise, and we're so famous for being planful, this would be a good place to be planful.
What are our thoughts over here? Anybody want to weigh in? Kimberly?
Yeah, I don't know that I have much to add to. I pretty much agree with what Kizzy and Deb are saying, that I would lean more towards owner occupied, or some cities that said like the owner either has to be in the house or living next door. So like the owner there. So in proximity. Yeah, I don't have much else to add.
I would just,
Okay. Amanda?
Yeah, I'll go. I agree that absentee landlords are a concern for short-term and for long-term rentals. Overall, we have a long-term rental in our neighborhood that has continuously been a problem for the last several years. I also have stayed in a short-term rental in Minnetonka, and this was for a staycation with some friends. We wanted to get away from our spouses and our kids, and I'm nerdy and a rule follower, so we played board games and watched movies and were not passed out in the lake. But I found that kind of setting very important, and it's what kept me in Minnetonka instead of taking my staycation somewhere else. And I do see there being value in having some short-term rentals in the city. We could not have gotten what we wanted at a hotel, and we didn't need a big, a giant house or like a big, game, like a room in a library or something. We needed a place where we could be in our pajamas for a weekend. And I disagree with having some sort of requirement for having the owner stay nearby or be in the place, because again, for our purpose, we wanted privacy, we wanted to get away. I could also see if we had, if we required homestead, there being owners who say live in Arizona or Florida in the winter who want to have short-term rentals in their space. They care about their space. They're going to come back there. They will take care of it. But they are not going to be here during a short-term rental. And I think we need to allow for that type of use of properties where we have respectful owners. So for that reason, I'd say I wouldn't mind regulating. If we went that way, I would prefer to have homesteaded properties be included. And for public engagement, I think we would need to have something on the Minnetonka Matters, for example, and then engage with people who have done short-term rentals. And if we could find a way to find people who have stayed in short-term rentals in the city and see sort of what are their thoughts, I think that would be helpful as well.
And I'll weigh in here. I think we're conflating a couple issues. So I don't feel very strongly about any of this because I think it's not a current problem, but I understand the concern. It's not a major problem. It is a problem that should be addressed, and whether that's through nuisance or through this, I'm happy to consider it. But I don't think if the issue is short-term rentals on lakes, that is not impacting our affordability. Like, those are two separate things, and I think we at least should be intellectually honest about that conversation. Is that, are we doing this because we want to protect the lake properties, which is a reason, which is a valid reason? Are we doing it because we want to protect home values, which is a different reason? Because I think the issue is more so investors buying affordable housing for long-term rentals. I think that's a different problem that we have that we've been thinking about. I feel pretty strongly. I mentioned this, I re-listened to the meeting, and when we did home renovations over the summer, we should have moved into a short-term rental while that happened. We didn't. I have family members who have done that. You want to stay in the community. You have some obligations, if you're me, to stay in the community for that purpose. And and for some of the reasons that Amanda suggested, that's not necessary. I was comfortable with the idea of 30 days. I liked that. I liked that people. Yeah. I can also understand this issue of good people are coming to our community, quiet people who want to stay in our community to rent. And so I feel a little bit about that, but that would sort itself out at some point, I guess. I would be more, but it sounds like the council's going in a different direction, and I can get behind that. But I would be more interested in maybe putting some limits in place with some geographical considerations that would protect us on the side, and that would be a licensure, right? And then that would protect us on the side of lawsuits from existing short-term rental owners. That's my impression.
I could get on board with that, and I also liked your idea about maybe putting a cap on how many.
Right.
And so I thought that was a really good
I think
idea.
a cap, and then the last thing is I think there's some traps in the owner occupy. I mean, certainly, if you're looking at somebody who's a corporate rental, or somebody who's here for a couple months, or they're renovating their house or whatever, they need to rent a space, they're not going to do it with the owner present. I get the idea if there's some owner tied to it. I don't know how we manage that, right? That seems like other than it not being homesteaded, it being homesteaded as a requirement, which wouldn't hit on, if somebody is a snowbird, tell you what, they're a resident of Florida and their homestead is in Florida or Arizona. It is not in Minnesota. So that would be a problem. So I think we have, and then the last thing I will say is, if we're going to do robust public engagement about garbage cans, I think we have to do robust public engagement about this. I mean, so I would like to see that wherever we land on this, that we take an opportunity, because that will help us on the litigation side as well.
Yeah.
So those are my thoughts. I want to get to something that staff can do something with. So Paula, one more comment, and then let's see if we can coalesce on some direction here.
Yeah, thanks, I appreciate that. I just I wanted to, take a little bit of issue about intellectual honesty, because I think when you have, properties that, are run down and derelict, whether they're on the lake or across the lake, the trickle-down effects do affect all properties. And so they'll drive up rents. Often across the board. Now, does that affect large? No, but it's not intellectually dishonest to say that it's not connected. The second thing is that my understanding from Eric that there would be less of an issue legally, a risk to have an owner-occupied, and when I say owner-occupied homesteaded, not that they would actually be in the property while the short-term rental happens, but that they would be homesteaded. Now, they might be in Florida 5 months a year, but they have neighbors. I have neighbors next to me who are in Florida 5 months a year, but they're still invested. We have a relationship, so they care about their neighbors. That's not the same usually with absentee people who are non-homesteaded, so that is my concern. So those are the, I think most of the council seem to be interested in doing not the outright ban, which I respect, and we're interested in that intermediate, which seems to be the less legally risky position, which would be to have that owner rather than to try to do the licensure, which has gotten Wayzata into trouble. So that's what my final comment on
Okay.
that, and the fact that we did kind of go over this back in July.
Okay. Julie, go ahead.
No, I was trying to see if I could synthesize maybe
Yeah.
somewhat of a direction. I'm not sure. I think I didn't hear some support, not all of you supported a ban. Can I check that off the list?
I think
We're not doing ban.
Okay.
Okay. I heard some people say owner occupied. I heard some people say homestead. I heard some people, that was all over the board. So I'm going to throw some out here and then see if you like it. Homestead. Homestead.
So a homestead, though, my one concern with that
Okay.
is I've got some friends who they are in Florida 6 months and 1 day.
Okay,
right?
so
and
how-
that
yeah.
home is not homestead, and they're in Minnesota 5 months and 29 days, and they got their little app and they track it. It's all very
Right, they're very,
sophisticated.
I have a friend like that too. So, for
We'll
those
check
Florida
more on this.
residents who are like snowbirds, but they're not homesteading back here in Minnesota, are you concerned about that?
Well, that.
Not
Am I
sure yet.
concerned
I'm
about
gonna put,
those people? I don't know.
why don't I put a not sure yet? Okay, so we'll put this on, we'll talk about drafting and how to draft it, and then,
Oh.
no,
Did she
just
look in
hold
the
on for a
next
second.
one?
Yeah, do you have an ordinance, Susan, for us?
Yeah, just hold on. I know what you're going to say about the ADUs and stuff. Yeah, I know. I know what you're gonna say. Susan and I have worked together for 20 years. I know what she's going to say. Yeah, so basically on an ADU, you got to have an owner on one side of it. But that's not the case with a single family home, right? You don't have that situation, but I take your point. Thank you, Susan. Okay, so homestead, I'm going to put a question mark. We're not sure. We're not totally.
1, 2, 3. We didn't poll the rest of the council.
I'm just saying it's an
Just-
issue that doesn't seem totally
Right,
resolved.
you're right about that.
Right.
You're right about that,
The whole
Julie.
So I'll
6
just put a
months in
question
Florida.
mark by it, and we'll draft it one way, and then if you don't like it, how it's drafted, we can change it, right?
Okay.
Okay, then, did somebody said a couple of you said max number, so I don't know how many people said max number.
Me and Rebecca, I think.
I agree with the
I
maximum.
also
Max
agree.
number
We got
of
4.
properties owned.
Okay,
Yeah.
I got a max number. And then I'm gonna put geography. I have to think about that because I just don't know the answer to how to solve for that. And so that's gonna take inquiring minds to try to address geography.
Sure.
Okay?
Fair enough.
So I'm gonna put question mark there, but max number, yes, there seems to be a majority. Then, license or zoning. That seems to be a
License or
zoning. People are kind of, or some combo thereof, mound-like, right? Mound has the combo platter. Go ahead.
Might I mention on that, the licensing and zoning question, we will get some initial answer from the courts early June, late May about that. And so it may not matter whether we call it one thing or the other. The courts may say, if it functions like this, if it's drafted like this, if it regulates what we say is a use, not a business license, it's a zoning ordinance.
So I think
and then you have to recognize grandfathered rights. So maybe that goes to timeline.
Okay.
So maybe where we can
So-
have Eric kind of
Yeah,
advise
we
on
need,
it.
I think we just need a legal opinion on this, maybe the license versus zoning, right? Okay, so we'll get some legal advice on that, TBD, okay? Then on, did I forget any of the major areas? I'm looking at you, Eric, that we talked about. Anything in terms of the regulation? Otherwise, I'll move on to timeframe. Huh? Well, I think that depends on what Eric says, yeah. Okay. So Eric, if we go that route, we're getting advice from you. It's a month and a half to kind of get a draft ordinance for people. This is how we usually do it. We draft the ordinance, we post it on Minnetonka Matters, we invite people like the short-term renter owners to a meeting, and then anybody else who wants to talk to us about short-term. We just do this online engagement, and then we figure out how many people we've got concerned. Then we come to you, we introduce the ordinance, and we tell you what people are saying at that point. Then you tell us if you want us to change the ordinance, and then we'll come back and bring that ordinance to you. Now, if that gets really heated, right? If people are really upset on either side of this, that you are regulating or not regulating it enough, that can take longer, right? Because then you might want to make more changes. So at least a month to a month and a half to kind of get a draft ready, put it out for public consumption. So that's 2 months, probably 2.5 months of kind of prep work. That's in my head. And then when you get to a decision, that's up to you, how many changes you make and how the rest of the process goes. So that's my best guess right now. And I can be more, as we get more information, I can be more distinct about what dates and what meeting dates. Does that make any sense?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Mike, how did I do?
I think so.
Okay.
Fading.
Okay, sounds good.
All right.
Do we feel like I have a
Council,
plan?
we feel like we've got a
Yep,
plan?
Yep.
Okay.
So timeline, Julie, we're 3 to 5 months out.
Yeah, before you have an adopted. And that is not going to take care of possibly, and we'll get this in the legal, we'll address these grandfather situations, these 25 that exist today. And whatever scenario we come up with in the ordinance, we'll tell you what could happen with those, either grandfathering or no
What our
grandfathering.
exposure is on those.
Right.
Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Go
When
ahead,
you said
Susie.
you're gonna put a number on how many,
A max number.
yeah. How are you gonna determine a
I
number?
don't know, Kizzy. You got an idea?
Well,
We're gonna have to figure.
I don't know.
Well, I mean,
just-
we'll propose something to you, but I don't know, like tonight, I don't have a number in my head.
It's just gonna be one of the options, apparently.
Right. You don't have to, I mean, like, say I come with max 50, and you go, well, that's a crazy number, and then you say, no, I'm comfortable with 20.
Or
That-
we don't have to have any max, we could do the homestead.
You could.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking,
That's what
the number is kind of a little different. Only reason why I was thinking, putting a number on it, and I'll just be honest, I think about like people who don't have the funds to go ahead and start trying to get their license or whatever they need to do, homestead or whatever it is, what about people who maybe can't move as fast as others? So I always think about that part, like some people are.
Oh, I see,
the
like
people
getting
who-
it set up.
Yeah, people
Uh-huh.
who are able to move fast and say, well,
Kinda
they
like the
put
cannabis.
limitation. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
it's the same idea. Some people be left out because they can't move as quickly. So that's what I'm thinking about for that.
Got it. But I still heard a majority wanted to have a
Yeah,
max.
I'm either or.
Yeah.
It doesn't really.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think it's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to get the best draft for you possible, and if you leave a lot of these things to another time, you're going to be disappointed with the draft I bring you. So I think that's why I'm being a little bit, I'm trying to get as much data as I can from you and see where I've got consensus. Otherwise, we're just going to keep spinning about the issue. So I heard a majority say they wanted some kind of max. So
Well,
okay,
do we
here.
have a majority then? that also
Max,
said
like the max number.
She's
You
got them
did.
on the list.
You did.
Yeah.
And on that one, it was split. It was like 3-3, and I don't know where the seventh
What are we
one
talking
ended up.
Julie, why don't you back up?
Try it again.
Repeat everything that you
Yep.
heard.
There was no consensus to do a ban, period. So that's off the table. We need more legal advice on licenses, zoning, and Eric's gonna kind of give us some lay of the land, how to deal with that. Homestead was kind of half and half, and then where you're gonna land majority, I don't know. So I said we would bring back options for how to write that, okay? And I think there are choices that kind of get at what you're saying, but I have to have a more creative brain to think of them. Max number, seen it like you had a majority that wanted to regulate by max number, and geography also had support, although not understanding exactly how we would do that. So we're going to think about that. I think I got everything people talked about.
Okay.
And then the time frame, again, to reiterate, it's going to be at least 2 to 2.5 months to get something drafted and get it out for public consumption. And the reason, and I don't want you to think we're dragging our feet. We're trying to be really methodical about what we say, how we say it, give people a chance to weigh in so that there's no kind of question at some point if there's some legal matters. So we want to make sure people feel like we have given them an opportunity, but we're also putting out a draft that we could deal with and live with, right? Okay. That's a hard one. Sorry, Mayor, we took so
No,
long.
thank you.
I appreciate it.
No,
It's
thank you very
important.
much. So
Yeah.
here's what we're gonna do.
Let's
Oh,
see,
go ahead,
just
Mike.
on the public engagement, when we've gone out on Minnetonka Matters, Julie, 3 weeks? I mean,
Usually I
generally
leave
do
3
like
weeks,
3
yeah.
weeks on Minnetonka Matters. 2 seems not to be enough time to get the word out and people to go to the website and provide information. Longer than 3 weeks, then it feels like it gets elongated.
It's too long, yeah.
We usually kind of hone in on 3 weeks, just so you're aware of that. Okay.
And then to synthesize what was said, so that'll take time, and then we'll bring it to you. Yeah.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you very much.
Thank
And
you to all these
Lauren.
people.
Oh.
Appreciate it.
All right, so I see that we already have the graphic up for our last agenda item, which must mean that Mike and Miranda think we're gonna cruise through this next one quickly based on our conversation earlier today. Is that what you're thinking, Mike?
I'm not running the mouse, so I'm not sure.
I got it ready. Okay, so I think we need a break. My plan is to be out of here by 8:45. So everybody take a 3-minute break, fast break, so that we can keep it moving. And we're gonna try to get our study session done before 9, our first of the year before 9, okay? Come on, you ready, Miranda? Oh, I just turned mine off.
You turned it on just in time to say that.
You're still flashing. Okay. Sorry, I had to wait for my mic to turn back on. All right, so item D is the review of city council policies. So Mike, do you?
Yeah, you can kick it off. Yeah, you want me to kick it off?
Sure.
Go ahead. So in your, I think I shared all this with you when we connected. Sorry, let me back up since I had my mic on. Thank you, Mayor. As I think chatted with all of you today, really wanted to bring this item forward to you really for one really main reason, and that's with the council, make sure I get the right one here, Rules of Procedure. That's the 16-page document. And in there is how, I mean, kind of, if you read through it, I assume you read through it, kind of lays out a number of the procedures for meetings and et cetera. And so what's come up a few times over this last year is looking at the sequencing or the order of the agenda, and really I think for a couple of reasons. One, probably earlier in 2025 when there were more heavy business items really related to land use, I think we experienced where we'd have developers in the room, applicants in the room, and that's item 14 on the agenda. And oftentimes we might see meeting starts at 6, it's now 8:30 before we get to some of those really heavy items. And so not only just having people that are traveling and residents coming in sitting there for a couple hours, we're also getting to a stage in the night too where it's trying to tackle some heavy issues after a couple hours into a meeting. So I think we all can relate to the difficulties at times of tackling heavy issues when you're already 2 hours into a meeting. So there's some, I think a few of you had mentioned, well, should we switch that around? Should we look to move some things around on our agenda to acknowledge folks that come in so they're not sitting there for long periods of time and try to get to that business sooner? And one other thought in that is, well, maybe moving not only moving maybe 14 up, but also looking at reports from city manager and council, maybe moving that down, because sometimes that can take 15 minutes to 30 minutes at times. And so really trying to kind of shift things around. And so that's why we put it on here, was really just to have that conversation, because the only way to change the agenda is through the policy. And so if there's an appetite from the council to change the agenda, you would have to do it through a policy change. So that's why it's there. We did at the same time, I added in there the other document, and that's a little bit lengthier, which is, 233 pages. That's city council policies. The idea was not to go through that and dissect it. It was really meant to just give you as a reference point, knowing there's another document there. As all of you have gone through orientation, and Amanda will now be going through orientation, we show this document to you when you get onboarded, and then you probably don't see it again. And it's been a number of years since it's been reviewed. Or maybe ever saw it. And so that document is yours as well. And so not only do you have, as policymakers, ordinances obviously, but this also is a pretty significant document, and it really provides guidance to staff in all the areas that are outlined in there. So just wanted to put that back in there as reference, mainly if there's something in there that you thought might call attention to, where not to really address tonight, but something to maybe flag for upcoming conversations as we look at the 2027 work plan, and perhaps even putting some issues on the table for next year. Understandably, Lynn, I think I've talked to a couple of you that there's some cleanup on it. It's been a document that's been out there for a while. I recognize there's some sections that generally need some housekeeping, and that's to be expected when you have a document that's living and breathing for so many years and we haven't really done anything with it for a while. So that's kind of a different conversation, I think, but certainly just wanted to have that in your hands. So really I thought tonight was really just about that agenda management, and if there's anything else in that 16-page document that jumped out at you. Staff doesn't have particular recommendations on any other sections in that for your consideration. So that's really tonight's conversation, is looking at that agenda management, and if there's anything else. And then, I don't know if Rebecca, you want to chime in on some of the thoughts we had?
I'm going to jump ahead just because, and you guys can all weigh in, but I'm going to let you know what I think, because I did kind of ask Mike to put this ultimately on the agenda. So probably going back to last year, I maybe thought about this a little differently. I think our agenda outline has worked for us in many ways so far this year, and so maybe I have some reservations about moving things around now. So what I suggested to Mike was two things. So the first thing related to how we manage our agendas was, in reading that policy and the guidelines, you know, we do have the authority to move the agenda, adjust the agenda order within a meeting. So perhaps if we see that there's a more efficient way to run a meeting, we have an agenda item that's on other business, and that's the only thing people are there for, but we have something that we know as a council we're gonna take a long time talking about. Well, let's anticipate that and move that item via motion as a part of the individual meeting. Because as I was looking at, well, sometimes it's public hearings that take a long time, but sometimes it's other business that takes a long time. So understanding what would be more efficient, I'm not sure I have a great handle on that. So I would propose we take the next 6 months and think about how Mike and I, when we meet in the afternoon, think about how we think the meeting's gonna run, and maybe at the beginning of that meeting suggest talk with planning staff particularly about it too, and they can tell their applicants, their developers, when they can plan to come. Maybe it's a development that they want to be there. We know we're not going to get public comment on, and that's not gonna come till 9, we can tell them to get there at 8:30. And then if we get to the end of the year and we realize we've been moving the agenda around a lot in a certain way, maybe we can then think about that, changing the order at that point. And maybe when we get through some of the issues that we're dealing with now, hopefully, we can reconsider, do we want to move reports from city manager and council at that point? But I'm thinking that's maybe not the best idea in this moment in time. So that's my plan A, and then I'll stop talking after I tell you plan B, which I think is or for the council procedures, or the other document. Maybe that is a good topic for 2027 retreat, is staff can make proposed changes that they think make sense. They can identify some of the more substantive issues maybe we want to have a more robust conversation about. We can really tackle that document in a way this is our refresh. It's going to be our 2027 refresh. And we can start working on that over the course of the next year to know how, because that's a big document to try to update. So those are my thoughts. I'm happy to consider other ideas or, questions, comments.
So I would just say that, like, I don't object to your proposal, but we just might want to be cognizant of or aware of, like, if we're moving something with public comment up, people trying to plan when to be at the thing, so maybe coming later and then finding out that we've already that we've already done the thing. So, and I don't think that's like going to be a large number of people, because we've seen people sit for hours and wait. But just something to be aware of that could potentially happen.
Good point.
Yeah, I was
Go
going to
ahead,
say,
Betsy.
I like what Kimberly said, maybe letting the community know ahead of time, maybe at our council meeting where city manager may say, we're going to be adjusting, or maybe you say, we're going to be adjusting our agenda items here and there, and so just making sure they check ahead of time so they kind of alert them to it. So I like what you said though. You kind of deciding if things are going to be heavy, because my whole concern is when an item is heavy, I do not want it at the end of the night because I'm tired. So.
I agree. In general, I share the same concern about, switching it up, and then people that are, have been around long enough to sort of like time it out, and then we're like, no, already did it, haha, I don't want to.
Yeah, that's not.
Do a Lucy. But, and I also feel like, consent agenda generally, like, that is something easy to me that we could move at the end, because it's, it generally isn't that controversial. I agree with you. It seems like the wrong time for us I just feel like there are a lot of important things to say in reports because of what's going on, and I also suspect that it may be somewhat quieter for a short period of time, but I think it's going to ramp up again in some months, and I was reluctant to put those reports at the end, especially from the city manager. I think they're and I feel like you're going to have some important things to say. I feel like you could take a point of privilege and just speak at any point as the mayor also. And then in terms of the larger document, I'm sure you shared some things. There's just some, on a higher level, I feel like there might be some reordering of things like substance regulation that are a little here and there, and there are some locations that are in our recreation section that may not be in there by that time or should have been included, and then there's just some general cleanup. So I think doing it at a retreat is great, unless we have to do something like revisit the strategic plan, which
I think we've got one more year on that, right?
Yeah, one more year.
Yeah, so I think doing that next year, I mean, I mean, it's in pretty good shape, but there are some things that just really leaped out at me that could use some attention and cleanup, and I think would be so worthy, because then we'd all have looked at it and be more familiar with it, so I think it's a great idea.
Patsy?
Yeah, I wanted a copy of it, actually, a hard copy of it.
Yes, we'll get you.
Um,
Does anyone else
Just
want a
because I
hard
thought it
copy?
was so interesting and, really referenced that, like, throughout the next couple of years. And I also, part of it, I agree. I mean, I think what you'll know at the beginning of a meeting, when the room is full, you'll know that pretty much people are there that are going to be there and they're not waiting. That's what I think. So I think in those circumstances, I think, I think you'll get a feel for that. So I agree with your A and B.
Right. Thanks, Patsy.
So,
Go ahead, Kimberly.
so did you have a chance to check with Eric on my
I did.
question?
Do you want to preface it?
Oh, so I and Rebecca talked to you about this, that like the first part of our agenda, like down through consent agenda, I feel like doesn't need to be roll call votes.
Does it need to be what?
Roll call.
So, like we could change the whole first section to vote by acclamation, but I just wasn't sure procedurally how to do that.
Yep, so, Councilmember Wilburn, the under Robert's rules, actually, the default for voting on city councils is a voice vote. So then we have to look at our council rules of procedure. And there are two provisions that require roll call votes, 3.1, which is the initial attendance roll call, which you would have to do that, that's given. But it's 9.1, which requires a roll call vote on each motion. So that's more than you have to do, and you are in control of that. The charter just references that votes on motions, resolutions, and ordinances must be recorded unless the vote is unanimous. So that's where sometimes
So we would need to change 9.1 in the procedure if we wanted to do something other than a roll call.
Correct. And, just from experience, that approval of the minutes, approval of the consent agenda, it's usually a unanimous vote. It can be quick. Adjournment, all of those things can just be a voice vote.
So anything that's unanimous, even under the way it's written now, we can do by,
No, so that's just the difference between when the clerks are following the voting. If it's not unanimous, they have to record each and every vote. If it is unanimous, they just record whether it's pass, fail, or they can. But our clerks do, I think, track everything though. It's 9.1, which requires a roll call vote on each motion.
okay.
So, you could go to voice vote for a lot of things.
So do we want to amend that? So we need to amend that to be able to do that?
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Unless anyone objects.
I might pull out one example. There is an example, and I can't remember. It's a Minnesota community though, and their rules of procedure just says that the votes of the members on any ordinance pending before the council shall be by roll call vote, and then they allow voice vote for everything else.
Just one question.
Go
So
ahead.
if somebody wanted to pull something for a consent agenda item, then they could still do that, and then it would be a roll call vote after that.
You can still do that, and I think all of these provisions always accommodate any individual member requesting a roll call vote on any particular vote.
Great.
Or if there's a confusion, you can't hear the vote, it sounds like it's mixed, then you go, well, let's do it, let's do a roll call.
that's fine with me.
Sounds
Yeah.
fine with me.
I mean, it would save our clerks
Yeah, right.
the pain of it. And, I would probably say, because that could be at discretion, right? I mean, we could call a roll call vote if it's not a unanimous decision, would probably make the most sense, right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, that.
I forgot about this. I just pulled this is from the Minnesota Mayor's Handbook, and it's their appendix, it's their representative city council bylaws, sort of the form bylaws, and on their provision on this issue just says, the votes of the city council will be taken by voice vote.
I
So
haven't read that
it's just
handbook, so I'm gonna have to
across the
find
way.
it.
So yes, you could require it by certain things. You could just say that your votes are subject to voice vote, and we could have the accommodation for any individual member requesting a roll call vote.
Mike, do you have an opinion on it?
I don't. I was talking with Kimberly earlier, just thinking like, it's been a long-standing, obviously it's in your policies, and why is that? And I assume part of it is Minnetonka's just had this long-standing history of professionalism, and perhaps doing a roll call vote does, in my mind, signify some higher level of professionalism when you go through an individual vote the way that we do it. So it's more maybe just optics and what you want it to look like and the formality of vote taking. It certainly would speed things up. I'm sure Kelsey would probably love that. It's just kind of how you want your meetings to feel for you as council members.
Well, I feel like we can still take roll call votes on
Big things.
big things, but like passing the agenda, or, accepting the agenda doesn't,
It does bring up a question. So, almost every week someone has some change to, say, the minutes. We don't get into the substance of the changes, generally speaking, but how would it work to make the motion? Somebody would still make the motion to accept, and you could make the, if there are comments, and then it's still, instead of going down the line, it's still.
Right.
It's all the
Right.
same.
You're still making a motion to approve, but it's, there's a motion to approve. All those in favor say aye. Everybody chimes in.
Okay.
Opposed, then
Opposed,
nobody
nay.
says
Yeah.
no.
Yep.
abstention.
Well,
So I think it just comes down to how you want
Yeah.
it to feel.
I mean, it seems like people are
Yeah.
comfortable. I think to the extent that we can be more efficient, I think that trumps everything,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I think there's a level of professionalism to being efficient.
Yeah, I think people would argue staying until midnight isn't the super,
Right.
well taken, Kimberly.
I will say that on
Bias.
planning commission, we've done voice vote on most things unless it's a non-consent
bring something
agenda. So there's at least precedent within our city.
Not do it here,
Yeah.
but bring it back something.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
sounds
Yeah.
good.
All right, anything else on D?
So what I'm hearing is we will bring something back for you at a regular meeting.
Yeah,
Hear this conversation. We won't. Let's not. I think wordsmith yet tonight. We'll bring
That's
something
fine.
back to
Yeah.
you that we hear. Okay.
yeah, and
Let's-
that's, that'll have to be approved via a roll call vote.
Yes.
Sorry. Okay, so then we'll go ahead.
I guess one other quick thing. Now that one thing that's occurred to me, and maybe I haven't asked this of Eric, so this is going to be a surprise for him as well. Like minutes. Minutes are a separate item. There are many cities that put minutes in consent, and I don't know if that's
Minutes at the end.
minutes
In
is part of the
consent.
consent agenda.
Oh.
Oh, yeah?
That's,
Oh.
Sure.
it's even more
I guess I
efficient.
don't care.
I guess, but that also changes the.
Right, because we have there's a council rule procedure that says this is your agenda and it has the items. So yes, you could certainly do that. We probably just need to tweak that other provision and take it out as a separate line item,
They'd be pulled almost every time for minor things, so.
That's true.
Let's keep that, we'll consider
step at a
that
time?
with our other changes. If we decide to change the agenda going into next year, then we can.
These are
Do that.
mind-blowing tweaks, though.
Yeah, we're really getting into the thick of it. All right, let's
right.
move along to E, April study session topics, Mike.
Yeah, real quick. We'll just go through the next quarter real quickly. So April 20th was our next study session. So you'll hear from directors. That's from Amanda. First year hearing from directors, but that's our first step in the budget process. So we'll have our directors coming forward. What's that?
Oh my God.
So starting budget, and then we'll have both Chief Fox and Chief Borboom here next time with an update on the public safety master plan and how the implementation is going. And then part of that, it's not on here, Kimberly brought this up and I think it's a great idea. At the same time with Chief Fox here and Chief Borboom talking about public safety master plan, we'll have them go through just safety procedures for meetings. And so we have our study sessions here. And so our emergency management coordinator, Erin Morris, will be here. We think we'll carve out a few minutes just to talk about this room, just safety procedures. This is, I'd say, our most vulnerable room as a council.
The whole
just with
glass wall, right?
glass wall, you have your backs to folks, and so it's good planning. And so we'll do that, and then we'll go to the council chambers as well and just talk through some scenarios on the what ifs. I think all of you know we do have bulletproof plating in certain locations, so we'll kind of walk through that and just kind of walk through if something were to happen on different scales, kind of what to do in those moments. So we'll just do kind of a reference check on that. We do have our 30-minute open time. Amanda will get you caught up on that tomorrow, what that looks like. And then in May is our official budget kickoff. And so part of that, we'll talk about some marsh operations, our rec amenities funding, priority-based budgeting, so we're excited about that. That's coming along really well. And then Peter Leatherman will be back with our community survey results. And then in June, will be more budget stuff with our CIP. And then also in June is coming back, as staff are coming back with the Purgatory Park update. So that's our next quarter.
Excellent. Any questions, anybody? All right, not seeing any. There you have it. We are adjourned.
Yay.